apparently, nearly half of us, 47%, want another election.
Yeah, well, we've just been talking about the online petition, haven't we? Which I just checked. It's nearly 3 million signatures. And I think there may be actually going to be a debate on this.
There is.
In January.
Scheduled in January the 6th.
Oh, it's exciting. Apparently half of voters want another election. Unsurprisingly...
Where's this come from?
This is a poll in the iPaper. But unsurprisingly, the support for a rerun of the general election is highest amongst Reform and Conservative voters. 81% of Reform voters and 77% of Conservative voters would like another general election. And obviously, support is lowest amongst Labour and Lib Dem voters, although a third of them would like another general election.
So a third of Labour voters at the last election want to rerun it.
And Lib Dem voters, say they would like to rerun it.
That is interesting. That is significant. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to dismiss... You see, well, all these people who want an election...
Who lost.
Well, they didn't vote Labour anyway in July, so what? But, if a third of people who did vote either Labour or Lib Dem, who you would think would be more sympathetic to the government, that's a big number. It does
highlight the dissatisfaction and the sort of underwhelming verdict on Labour's performance thus far, even amongst their own voters.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Of course, they're not going to rerun the general election.
No.
But I do think this whole movement, I do think the petition... I mean, you can't ignore 3 million people. Well, you can ignore them, and they will ignore them, but it's a lot of people.
But it should rattle their cage.
Yes.
To say, we've got another 4.5 years, we need to start changing a direction.
Yeah.
Is Kemi Badenoch capable of doing that with this sort of ammunition? I mean, will she make a meal of it or not?
I mean...
Have we been impressed by her so far?
The jury's still out. But I've written a piece for this weekend, and I've spoken to Tories, and opinions split, shall we say, on how she's done so far. One school of thought is that she needs to be out there more, really taking it to the government. The other school of thought is, look, there's 4.5 years to go to the next election. It's plenty of time. Just, let the government shoot itself in the foot and then just make sure you're a competent alternative come the next election.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wouldn't know how to play it, but I have to say, I mean, what do most people see? And if anything, it's PMQs.
Yeah.
I was going to say, she's been pretty impressive at PMQs.
She's good at PMQs.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, the jury's out on that one. It's like, I think the first couple certainly were a bit...
I thought she was very good this week.
She was better.
But
definitely better.
In the sense that she really makes it seem as though the PM is not answering any questions.
Yeah, she was better, although I think she maybe slipped up by not calling him to resign, but suggesting he might want to resign. You think, well, hang on. Once you've done that, where else is there to go?
Yeah,
once you've asked them to resign once,
just
you
do it
can't
every week
again.
for the next 4.5 years.
Well, he did. He did it.
Exactly.
True.
But
no harm.
You say she was good in PMQs, but who watches PMQs apart from journalists?
That's my
and
worry.
politicians?
Yeah.
Well, it's clipped up though, isn't it? For the even people who just watch stuff later on in the evening.
And
they're not watching it live.
The other point a lot of people make is, well, William Hague was brilliant at PMQs. Regularly guested Tony Blair.
Yeah.
And yet he got hammered in 2001. So, but the significance of PMQs, I think, is for the people behind you. That you put a spring in their step, give them a little bit of encouragement. Well, our leader's on top form, so that's quite good. So it does have its benefits. But you're right, in terms of... One other MP said to me, no one's going to remember what PMQs were like now come the next election. No one's going to be voting based on how Kemi did in 2024.
True.
But she's got to build up
But she does. That's not to give her a pass.
But you're right, it's more about what happens with the government, what can go wrong, what
Governments
more
tend
can
to
go
lose
wrong.
elections.
It hasn't been an easy 5 months at all
No,
for
it
them.
hasn't. Definitely not.
And it's more for them to keep
I think they realise that as well, that they need to up their game, without a doubt.
And maybe Salmond needs to spend a little bit more time in this country.
He has been abroad a lot.
He has been abroad a lot.
I mean, most of it, though...
in the papers. This isn't me. This is a narrative in the papers. Starmer's globetrotting divides Westminster.
But he has been, but he's not just been on jollies, has he? I mean, he has been on these...
I didn't say jollies.
These important...
I think a lot of it has been...
meetings.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much unavoidable foreign travel.
He went to COP.
He did go to COP.
No,
he didn't.
No, that was a waste of time.
He didn't need to go to COP because not very many
But then he went
leaders
straight on
did.
to somewhere else as well, to another...
Well, he's been to the G20, he's been to CHOGM, which is the Commonwealth, G7. He's been to America a couple of times, and he'll be going again to see Trump, I'm sure, at some point.
To give him his due, you'd be worried if he wasn't going to those sort of things. What are online sickfluencers?
Yeah, this is really weird. You know the benefit system, the PIP system and the disability, applying for disability benefits, it's sort of based on scoring points, and you have these interviews with your assessor and all of that. It now turns out there's a sort of generation of online TikTok and YouTubers who are giving coaching, basically, telling other people how to game the system, how to increase their scoring points, how to sort of maximise their benefits, how to get high scores in certain criteria, such as psychological distress, you know, just so they can maximise, as I say, their disability benefits. If you say you're suicidal, for example, you go straight to the top of the charts. And how you need to get into the top categories in order to maximise your benefits. It's really quite an insidious thing. I mean, we've got a real problem with disability benefits.
It isn't surprising that this is happening, though, is it?
Not surprising.
No.
Some people are telling others
Not
how
when
to
it's kind of
maximise your
gamified
chances.
in this way. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
It's
the
pretty
cost
depressing, actually, that there
It
are
is
people
depressing.
doing that. Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's a major problem for the government because the bill has gone up and up and up and has soared since
nearly
COVID.
100 billion by the end of this decade, with
That's
nearly there'll be
unsustainable, isn't it?
It's
3.3 million people already claiming disability benefits.
Something's got to be done.
It is a massive problem.
And so that the people who actually are deserving of it get it and get
Oh,
what
totally,
they need.
absolutely. It should be there for people that deserve it, but
That's the
it shouldn't be people trying to game the system.
No,
definitely
no.
not.
Right, we've got 1 minute left.
Oh,
Kevin.
shall we talk about this? Talking of social media and things,
Yeah.
TikTok sensation.
It's a lovely story. This is a 92-year-old man called Edwin Rayner, who was a singer in his youth. He gave it up when his wife died of cancer 9 years ago. His grandchildren so he was given a gift voucher for a 2-hour session in a studio to make his own CD. He now goes back every week because he loves it so much. His grandchildren filmed it, put it on TikTok, and now he's got like people like Michael Bublé, his label, asking him to do cover versions.
Wow.
So he's become a TikTok sensation.
And Disney have asked him to perform their hit songs for his legions of online fans.
Yeah,
so he's going down well with everybody.
He's got 450,000 followers on TikTok.
We'll see
and
if we can-
150 on Instagram.
We'll see if we can find a clip of him doing
He's
just
a
this.
retired
It's a lovely-
tropical fish dealer.
Yeah, it's an amazing
I
story. It's a
know.
great story.
Yeah, we've got it. We'll play you a clip later on
Yeah.
of him. Good on him.
Yeah,
That's
good
what
on
I
him.
say.
Yeah,
Let's just hope
92, he's got a whole new career.
Yeah.
a fortune. Let's just hope he doesn't have to.
Just starting.
Well, anyway. Can we have a look, Kevin, at the Telegraph? Trade unions not happy with Keir Starmer.
Surprise, surprise. Yeah, so obviously Louise Haigh had to resign yesterday. I think she was probably made to resign, strongly encouraged to resign, certainly by Number 10 when this story broke. Now, the suggestion in the Telegraph is that this was all a plot by a chap by the name of Morgan McSweeney. Some of your viewers may have heard of. He is now Chief of Staff for...
Oh, yes, after Sue Gray
Sue
left.
Gray, yeah. Now, the suggestion is that he, obviously being aware of what she'd done, what Louise Haigh had done 10 years ago, planted it with a journalist, and it came to fruition this week. And lo and behold, she's been ousted because she was seen as being too left-wing. Now, that is the conspiracy theory. That's certainly been pushed by trade unions and the left.
Would there be any truth in that? I mean, the story had to come from somewhere.
It did have to come from somewhere, and I would dearly love to know where from. Now, I've been asking one or two people this morning in the Labour Party what they make of this, and well, I can't really repeat what some of them have said about it, but they're pouring cold water on it, shall we say. They say it's not true, that this was a put-up job to try and get her out, because they're making the point that if Keir Starmer didn't like her or thought she was too left-wing, he wouldn't have put her in the cabinet in the first place, which I guess is, a persuasive argument. But there's undoubtedly a strong suspicion that it was a political hit job. And if you look at the letter that Keir Starmer wrote to her in response to her resignation letter, it was very terse, very short, very unusual. Actually, Prime Ministers usually lavish praise on ministers who are resigning. No matter what they've done, they always find something good to say about them. But this was very short, and a lot of people reading into that.
It was short, wasn't it?
It was noticeably terse. Although he did say in it, I'm sure you've got a great contribution to make in the future, so I wouldn't be surprised to see her come back, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't so damaging, was it?
No.
It wasn't the worst crime ever. It was a conviction. But there's also suggestions in the papers that this did come out that this was leaked during the election, but the Conservatives didn't really have enough detail or evidence to stand it up.
Yeah, that's
right. It didn't come out then.
Yeah.
It's just interesting, the Morgan McSweeney thing, how he won his power battle with Sue Gray, and now
he appears to be...
seems to be...
He's seen as the sort of Prince of
out.
Darkness.
A lot of power,
Prince of
these people,
Darkness.
don't they?
And
And it does raise questions about Salmond, again, about his authority and about his sort of judgment.
Well, he knew about this in 2020. You know, when he made her shadow Northern Ireland Secretary back then, she told him about this conviction. So he did know about it. But I think there was more to come out in this story, and the decision was taken, look, just get her out, and then it's someone else's problem. You know, she's not damaging the government if she's on the back benches, because there's something that doesn't quite add up about her story, I think.
Okay.
In my opinion.
Well, yeah, I think it's how it doesn't smell right, does it?
There's a very naughty cartoon in the bottom of the Telegraph. Have you seen it, Kevin?
Yeah.
Or the Mac cartoon.
The Mac cartoon at the bottom, where there's a policeman going up to the door of number 10. He says, "The ex-Transport Secretary has reported that a ministerial car has been stolen from her."
Ouch.
Ouch. But that's clearly the way the
There are
gossip
some
is
funny
going.
memes online.
I know, I can
with
imagine.
people opening their drawers and all your old mobiles, all your old Nokias.
Yeah,
And
everything falls out.
Emma, let's have a look at the Daily Mail, should we? As we hurtle towards Christmas.
Yeah.
If you fancy a family day out?
This really is quite astonishing. Your full sort of festive family day out for a family of 4, say, could cost you up to 500 quid. So that includes, what does it include? It includes your Santa's grotto, your Christmas lights display, your panto, drinks, snacks, merchandise, all of that kind of thing. Could be up to £500.
Whoa.
Yeah, but by contrast, if you went to Prague for a weekend and did the Christmas market, same thing, family of 4, hotels, flights and everything included, could be £390. But I've got a friend who said she had a brilliant idea. What she does, she takes her kids on the top deck of a bus along Oxford Street,
Yeah.
with a flask of hot chocolate and mince pies. And what a brilliant... I mean, that's probably a £5.
Yeah.
On a bus, up and down
The lights
Oxford
are amazing.
Street to
I saw them last night. Yeah, they are.
Really lovely.
Yeah.
Well, that's the way to do it. Mind you, some of these, I don't know what it costs. Well, I mean, they're saying Bristol, for example, £308.
Yeah,
It's still a lot of money, but, you know, you need to get... I don't know what it costs in Barrow, in Furness, to go to Santa's Grotto. Not that much, I shouldn't think.
Thought so.
But everything does cost.
Oh, it does, yeah. And this is the time of year when they really cash in, because they know that kids absolutely love it, and parents are under a lot of pressure to keep the kids happy and will pay through the nose.
Yeah, and they're
I'm not sure they'd pay that much right enough.
Well, they're talking about, and you're right, it's London prices, of
Yeah,
course, inflate everything. But when you do think about, I don't know, a German Christmas market or a Prague Christmas market, they're wonderful.
They're
They
amazing.
can actually
Yeah.
get away. Often you can get away, although I'm sure you'd spend more once you're out there. But the thing they're talking about is parents, this obsession with creating magical memories, trying to create the perfect Christmas for their children.
Yeah.
Which I think our parents just let us get on with it. You know, they didn't.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is before you start on presents and all of that, Stephen. So I think it's, you know, it all adds up a lot.
Yeah.
And it's worrying if you're already feeling the pinch.
I did take my dad on a virtual reality sleigh ride. Just because they had one in the centre near me in my town.
All right.
I said, oh, come on. He's just recovering from an operation. He's 79. Said, let's get on this. No, I'm not going on. I said, come on, let's
Virtual
get on
reality,
it.
did you put on a
the
headset?
goggles and all the rest of
I
it.
see.
It was, and that was £6 each.
Yeah.
For,
Was it good?
For 5 minutes. It was good, but I spent the entire time with my dad going like this. Went downhill or whatever. It was very good.
They're incredibly realistic, the
Yeah, they
VR
really are,
headsets.
aren't
Oh,
they?
that'd be great for a little one. Yeah.
Minister on one occasion that he was perhaps better suited to the stage than to politics.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast. I'm Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor, bringing you the best news, gossip and stories from the heart of our Westminster studio. For me, politics started to go a bit balmy in 2014 when the UK nearly broke up after the Scottish independence referendum. Then came the 2015 election, win for the Tory party, the 2016 EU referendum, the 2017 election, the 2019 election, the Boris Johnson landslide, Brexit, the collapse of Johnson's government, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, and then the July 2024 Labour landslide. It's been quite a journey for many of us, quite a ride, and charting the way through this for many of us has been my friend Tim Shipman. He's the Sunday Times' political editor for a lot of that time, 2014 to 2021, and is now the paper's chief political commentator. But he's maybe as well known as the Boswell de nos jours of our modern political times, with 4 books offering an insider's guide to this political drama. The first one was All Out War, the full story of how Brexit sank Britain's political class, 2016. Fallout, the year of...
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, for God's sake. I put it on airplane mode. I thought that was going to do
You
the
see,
job.
he's really not really a broadcaster yet, is he? He does a lot of broadcasting.
Hey Siri, power off.
But he's maybe as well known as the Boswell of our times, with 4 books offering an insider's guide to all of this political drama. They are All Out War, the full story of how Brexit sank Britain's political class, 2016. Fallout, a year of political mayhem, get it, 2017. No Way Out, Brexit from the backstop to Boris, 2024. That was in, I think, April this year it came out. And finally, out this week, Out is called, How Brexit Got Done and 4 Prime Ministers Were Undone. An epic effort, and he's with me now for this podcast, a special edition for your weekend listening. Tim Shipman, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Thank you, Chopper. I'm exhausted just listening to all that.
Can I give you a present before you start? Here it is. It's a GB News mug for you and Lady Shipman
Thank
to
you
drink
very
your
much.
morning tea from
I'll
at
put
home.
it next to the one of your giant mug on a mug,
Yes,
which we have in our kitchen.
It's got my
from
face
the
on
last
that one.
time I did this podcast
That's
in
right.
April.
One of the previous books, that's right. How many words have you written in all these books? You must have counted it up. Is it millions?
I think it's about 1.1 million,
Goodness me.
which is not far off twice as long as War and Peace.
Yes, yes. But perhaps more interesting than War and Peace. I mean, I've got the book here. I've had this in my rucksack at work, trying to read it on the train home. It is a hefty tome, isn't it?
It is, but that covers 5 years. I mean, the first book covered about 5 months, and the second one covered about 15 months.
Yes.
The third one covered about 2.5 years, and this is 5 years worth. It's the whole of Johnson, Truss,
Yes.
Sunak, and the election. And I mean, if you've waded through 700 pages of Theresa May's agonising battles with Parliament, this is kind of the cathartic reward at the end of it.
Yes.
This is, I think, the most fun one. 600 pages of Boris Johnson doing what Boris Johnson does, which
And are the books different? The first and second ones dealt with a year each, didn't they? And then you've had the one, say 2016, 2017, the first 2 books, and then the 2 books most recently deal with a longer time span. And does that change how you write? Because I think people thinking back over a couple of years get a different view of where they were than the immediate recollection.
I mean, yeah, I guess the thing is, it's not just the time period you're covering, but also when you're writing. So the first 2 I turned around very quickly. The first one was written in about 3.5 months
On Brexit itself.
on the referendum. So that all came out sort of later that year. And the same with the second book, which was primarily about the 2017 general election. And that, again, was turned around very fast. The last 2, which have kind of been written almost sort of simultaneously, have just been desperately wading through events and trying to catch up to sort of the present day and never quite pulling it off until we got to the general election. So you have to decide where to zoom in and out, but people have kind of got used to a certain level of detail, and, you know, if you like this sort of thing, you'll like it a lot. If you don't, then you're probably not listening to this podcast anyway.
It was traumatizing to go through it, and I'm starting to read this stuff. I mean, initially, I must admit, your first book, I was such hard work covering it as journalists back in 2016, 17. I couldn't face doing it all again, reading your books, but I'm finding them more entertaining the further I get away from it.
Well, I mean, they tried to be entertaining. I mean, you know, there's some serious stuff in there, obviously, and you know, what I try to do is give all the politicians a fair shake and judge them on whether they achieved what they wanted rather than what I think was a good idea. And some of them succeeded, and the vast majority of them failed. But, you know, if you're going to wade through a 900-page book, I need to make sure that there's something entertaining on every page, and hopefully there is, in terms of amusing quotes or little incidents that you didn't know about. And then when you get to the really big events, getting inside the room and getting testimony from everybody who was there. And hopefully taking the reader, properly behind the curtain of what goes on in politics.
Yes. And why do people speak to you? I mean, in your introduction, you talk about how mainly it's on background and then sometimes quoted. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, what I do is I try and talk to people and just find out what happened, and they know the way I write is I try to reconstruct what went on. I don't say this person told me this or this person told me that. Sometimes it's kind of obvious who's probably given you the information, but hopefully most of the time not. And, it's all come from people who were in the room or people they talked to or people they explained their feelings to. But I try and get you inside people's heads, and I try and, get as many accounts as possible of key moments, because everybody's recollections are different. And even, frankly, minutes after things happen, I mean, some of these meetings, were leaking in almost real time. And others, I mean, I think back, it's in book 3, but the Chequers meeting that Theresa May held, where she's finally set a Brexit policy. I spoke to 11 cabinet ministers shortly after that finished and worked through the night to write a piece for the paper.
Yes.
And a lot of what I've written is based on that. But equally, I then did events, interviews after the event, and people are prepared to say more. And you say, why do they talk? Everybody, I think, recognised the kind of historic nature of a lot of these events and wanted to kind of participate and make sure that, the sort of record, the first kind of historical record was correct.
Which it is.
And they also, having read the first book, I think, realised that pretty well everybody else was going to talk, and if they didn't, it would be other people's versions of events that were going to get sort of primacy. So, and I think hopefully people trust me to do it in a fair way and not to stitch them up. And if they tell me stuff, then now I'll try and fairly represent what they were about. And I think that's kind of how we've arrived at.
And how have you managed your duties at the Sunday Times? Because people tell me things. I normally try and get it out there straight away because we're journalists, aren't we? But you have to hold bits back, don't you?
Well, look, people will, if there's a big set of events, I'll always write a big read for the Sunday Times about it, and people will tell me a load of things, and there's an immediacy to that, which is quite useful for the books. But at the same time, some people who are now used to contributing to the books will say, this is for the paper, but you can only use this in the book because it would be too awkward if it came out now. And bluntly, it's not that difficult to navigate because they wouldn't tell me if they thought I was going to put it in the paper. It all ends up in the paper eventually when we do a serialisation. So the editor's very tolerant of that. And, people, you get as much information as you can when you can. And, in the process of writing the second and third books, I was sort of beginning to write the fourth book, I guess. People were telling me things.
There wasn't meant to be a fourth book, was
well,
it?
Well, no, there was supposed to be one third concluding volume of, approximately the same length as the first two, which was about 600 pages. And in the end, 3 and 4 combined is about 1,600 pages. And my publishers were very tolerant, but I think took the view that, if we were going to do this properly and give people what they were expecting from the first 2 books, then it was right to kind of do 2 books, and it was right that they were reasonably long. And, sales so far would seem to suggest that people who've liked the others will buy this.
Well, they are.
And hopefully...
and libraries and students buy them, I think, because they are, as you say, the first. We maybe write the first draft of history in newspapers, but this is the first actual draft, maybe, because it's a proper book.
Well, and the great joy is getting on a university reading list. So sales for book 1 have sort of steadily picked up over the last 3 or 4 years because... students are buying the paperback. It's not enough to do more than buy you a good lunch chopper. But
yes, well, I will take lunch off you, Tim Shipman. In terms of Out, what's the best story in it? You think the best bit of gossip in here? I'm sort of at the beginning of it, I'm afraid.
Well, the best bit of gossip is what the Queen thought about Boris Johnson, because Boris Johnson in his memoirs wrote this sort of long, rather cloying section about his great love-in with the Queen. It turns out in private her views were a bit more nuanced.
What did she say about him?
Well, I think she had an affection for Boris Johnson. She, by all accounts, liked talking to him. Imagine if you've spent 2 years talking to Theresa May and then you get to speak once a week to Boris Johnson. I imagine that's a good deal more entertaining. But I don't think she held him in the great respect that he felt that she did. And she told one minister on one occasion that he was perhaps better suited to the stage than to politics. And then...
Which I think is true, by the way. Because I think, just briefed on me, my view on Boris Johnson doesn't exist. He's called Boris Johnson in terms of his public persona. He's Al at home. The real person isn't Boris Johnson. It's a mask he puts on to cheer up the crowds. But behind the scenes, he's Alexander Johnson, Al Johnson.
I think that's true to a degree, though I think it's a mask that he's worn for so long that it's so sort of woven into him that I'm not sure he's able to separate the two anymore if he ever was. But... Yeah, I think.
And the Queen, yeah.
So she was affectionate about him, but I don't think she held him in quite the respect that he hoped. And 2 days before she died, she had a gathering at Balmoral with some of her closest aides, and she was asked about Boris by one of them, and she said, "Well, no, well, at least that idiot won't be organising my funeral now that he's gone."
Idiot.
Which is a sort of quite punchy. It was clearly said with a modicum of jest, and this was recounted by that senior courtier to a member of the cabinet at the big Privy Council meeting just after she died, where the cabinet effectively accepts the new king.
The accession.
The accession Privy Council. So yeah, the one that Penny Mordaunt was chairing before she got the sword.
Yes, yes.
So that was and then
That was Saturday morning, I think, from memory.
I think the best section of this book is probably the first bit, which is the last 6 months of 2019, where Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings are desperately trying to ram through Brexit, and they come up with a pretty aggressive political strategy. And there's lots of great stuff in there about, Boris Johnson deciding to prorogue for 5 weeks whilst parading around in Bermuda shorts and a pair of work shoes that he'd been playing tennis in, slightly bizarrely. He then gets Geoffrey Cox, the Attorney General, to sort of say whether this is lawful or constitutional. And Cox says it's both, but 3 times warns him, by the way, the Supreme Court might take the case and they might rule against you. And when the Cabinet were about to discuss it, Johnson phoned up Cox about 10 minutes before and said, "Geoffrey, if you wouldn't mind not mentioning all that to the Cabinet." And Cox sort of rather foolishly goes along with that. So I thought that was
foolishly or rightly, we got there in the end with Brexit. I mean,
well, we did. I mean,
he's his lawyer, of course.
Yeah, no. I mean, Cox's view would be that if they'd made a political argument that they were justified in sending Parliament away so Boris Johnson could negotiate with Europe, then they might well have won in the Supreme Court. But because they did it in a sort of underhand fashion, it didn't work out that way. But so that was all fascinating. And there's some great sort of meetings between Dominic Cummings, who was his chief aide, and Helen McNamara, who was the deputy cabinet secretary. On what occasions Cummings is trying to get Johnson to break the law by not sending the letter to Brussels that the Ben Act decreed that he had to, asking for an extension. Gosh. And McNamara's at home with her kids, one of whom is sick, the other of whom is having a phase where he wears a Wonder Woman outfit. And she's basically told to come in on a Friday morning to try and sort of see off this attempt to break the law. And she races in with, one in their pyjamas, one in a Wonder Woman outfit, and parks her car, races through the Foreign Office and the Treasury into number 10, thrusts her kids into the arms of someone and goes into this meeting where Dominic Cummings is saying, well, we'll just ignore the law, and if the police try and arrest Johnson, they'll have to batter the door down, and that would be great. And Helen McNamara points out that the police on the door of Downing Street would be the ones doing the arresting because they work for the Queen, they don't work for the Prime Minister.
Correct.
So this is, there's lots of sort of slightly farcical stuff that's still very important. But I'd very much take the view that was the one bit of the last sort of 8 years where politics was done properly with the studs showing, and Cummings and Johnson knew exactly what they were trying to do, and they succeeded in doing it. And they pushed through the thing that people had voted for. And I think
that's one of the key points of the book. I think that in fact the introduction that you talk about, you've got this long view of history, Tim Shipman, over all these different PMs you've covered: Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, Sunak, and the Tory side. I mean, and I think you do conclude that if you know what you want to do, you can do it. But the trick is knowing what you want to do. That's the point, isn't it? And that's how you achieve things in politics.
I think there's 3 things. I think you need to know where you want to go, and quite precisely, not just vaguely. And that can come from your ideology, it can come from focus groups, it can come from all of those different things. But knowing where you want to go and then telling people, but also having the tactical skill to get there. So you need good people around you who are good at politics. But you need, as a leader, you need not only to be selling your vision of where the country needs to go, but also have that ability to communicate with the public and with your MPs and with the media and take people with you. And for that period, Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings ticked all of those boxes, and their opponents often didn't, because they weren't where the country was on this issue. And Theresa May didn't know where she was going and got herself into a total muddle. And by the time she'd decided where she was going, nobody else wanted to go there with her.
Because Brexit meant Brexit, but no one knew what Brexit was.
No, exactly. And she had an opportunity to define it, and she didn't do so successfully until it was far too late. Liz Truss knew exactly where she wanted to go, but she didn't have a sensible tactical plan and ignored all the people who told her, perhaps do it this, slow down, do it like this. And literally everybody warned her. You know, people say, oh, well, she had all these Tory ideologues around her who wanted her to do the same thing. But Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor, Simon Clarke, who was a levelling up guy but was part of her economic quad, Chris Philp, who was her Chief Secretary, all these people agreed that they wanted to boost growth and do all this exciting stuff. But they all said you have to balance this with some spending cuts. And she basically said no. There was another occasion where she had to decide how much are we going to bail out households on their energy bills, and the difference between capping their bills at £2,500 a year or £3,000 a year, that is a £10 billion decision. And Kwasi Kwarteng said, well, we should talk about this, and she said, no, just do £2,500, that's it. And when Simon Clarke was trying to set up enterprise zones, the Treasury wanted to cap the numbers, otherwise they'd have limitless areas of tax-free sort of business going on. And she just said to Clarke, no, I want hundreds, if not thousands of these things. And she sort of goes over to him in the cabinet room, flutters her eyelashes and says, you've got to live a little. And that's how the government of this nation was being done. And then Rishi Sunak, arguably, Truss didn't listen to her aides and did too much. And then Sunak didn't listen to his aides and did too little. And they were all desperately trying to get him to sell a big narrative about where he wanted to take the country.
We were waiting for that big speech, that big reset moment.
And it never came. No. All he wanted to do was govern in a kind of technocratic fashion. There's this scene at the start of his premiership where they're all desperate to get to Chequers and have a 2-day sit down with a whiteboard and work out the numbers, the messaging, the narrative. And he's not interested. He just says, I can run the bloody country. All right? That's you need to worry about the messaging, not me. And they finally persuade him to let them go to Chequers. And they turn up. He keeps them waiting for half an hour in the car park. They have about 2 hours of work. And then he says, well, thanks very much for coming. And off you go. And one of his aides... Dougie Smith, who's a bit of a trencherman, says, what, you're not going to feed us? And at this point, the poor old RAF people who run Chequers were dispatched to the kitchens. They'd not got any food in because Sunak hadn't told them they needed to feed 20 people. And in the end, some desultory bowls of soup were pulled out. And this Soupgate summit, no one could tell what the soup was. They just said it was very hot. That was sort of became emblematic of his complete refusal to knuckle down and do some politics.
Made worse because, of course, he pays for all the hospitality, and given he's a rather rich chap, he could have afforded a bit more of a spread than some soup, maybe. When it all ended, that government, I've always been struck, almost they kind of not properly discussed point of the election, I think, was that I was there in number 10, you outside, you were watching it, or you were there as well, when he said, I've been to the King, we're having an election. He did that, didn't he, to avoid his cabinet stopping him?
Yeah, I mean, he had...
It's a coup, basically. Was that a coup?
Well, I mean, it's not a coup because he's the Prime Minister, and ultimately the decision is his. But it's the kind of decision that you would normally involve people in. He effectively told David Cameron and I think Jeremy Hunt the night before... Cameron was a bit iffy about it, but agreed to support him. And then he called in an inner circle of cabinet ministers to tell them that he'd already been to see the King and asked them for his support in the big meeting. And then he had a big meeting of the cabinet. I mean, it was all a fait accompli by then. And he marches out into the pouring rain.
Yes.
And they're forced to watch this on the television. And even one of the ones who'd been supportive and knew about the plan was sort of disappearing into the collar of his shirt as this was happening. And Esther McVeigh goes, what on earth are we watching here as this rain comes down? He refused to use an umbrella, they just weren't. They didn't look like they were prepared. The Labour Party was far better prepared. It had been expecting an election in May and was ready for an election in May. The Tories didn't.
He never gave an answer on that. And of course, I was with GB News, was with him throughout the campaign. We'd often ask him, why are we doing this? Well, and he would say, it's all about a choice, right? I mean, he was making a choice. And
well, it was a choice. I mean, look, there are people in his team will tell you that they were worried that public sector pay deals would be very expensive, that the boats would keep coming, that they weren't going to get the interest rate cuts that they had hoped for at the start of the year, and that the OBR would not let them do another tax-cutting budget. But the guy who was there and was being paid a large sum of money to run the election, Isaac Levido, said, no, we need, if we're going to punch the Labour Party with both fists, that means new policy and an economic narrative, and we won't get the economic narrative unless we wait till the autumn.
And that was a memo you've seen, apparently.
I've seen the memo. There's extensive quotes from it in the book, and that was presented to him at the start of April. And Sunak, in the end, had been in this massive funk since the late spring, early summer of 2023. I mean, there's remarkable details in there from people in his inner circles saying, that he just couldn't understand why no one was supporting him and the public couldn't understand. Why don't they understand that I'm right about this stuff? This was a guy who, in the words of one cabinet minister, had always done his homework and couldn't understand why the voters weren't giving him an A. He looked at Boris Johnson and saw a guy who didn't do his homework and thought, I can do the job better than this.
Yes.
And then when it came to it, he couldn't. And then he had that bizarre reset at the Tory party conference where he acted HS2, he acts smoking, and he said he was acting A-levels, and all that stuff was sort of picked out of a kind of smorgasbord box of policies, because it was just stuff that Rishi Sunak felt like.
Again, he didn't know what he believed in. He was back to your point about power.
And one of his
power.
aides even said to me, look, we wanted him to have this new project to keep him engaged. It's basically the bloke was too sad. We had to give him something to do. And then throughout the autumn, when all those people were trying to oust him, and there was, what people called, the grid of shit plot to get rid of him.
A grid is a news grid for listeners to understand. It's a planned announcement.
So they were planning all the stories they were going to leak to try and damage him. They didn't know how close they got to getting rid of him. On 3 or 4 occasions, I'm told, he sort of went to his aides and said, really, wouldn't we be better off without me? And I should stand down. And they said, well, it's completely crazy to get rid of another prime minister now. But if they'd got the number of MPs to force a vote of no confidence, one of his very closest aides said to me, he would have stood, he would have tried to win. We think he would have won, but I think he would then have walked off and said, well, stuff you lot. You're on your own now. So if they got the numbers, and we think they got...
There was chatter about this. I mean, in terms of... I've read Graham Brady's book is quite helpful on letters going in and all the debate of the last 14 years. And I did a piece reported for GB News on Twitter. Maybe 30 letters have gone in against Sunak, maybe in April or March. And in the book, he reveals it only 6 at the time, and Chopper was wrong. He enjoyed telling me that.
There's lots of about me being wrong about letters at various points as well. But it's... I mean, look, the point is he was teetering.
But yes, he was teetering.
And it wouldn't have taken much to push him off his perch. But in the end, he called the election bluntly because he'd had enough. And he just... He didn't want the pain to continue, and he just felt like going for it. And it felt like... They didn't feel like they were in control of anything, and that was the one thing he could control, and he could say, right, I'm making the decision to go and do it. But it was a disaster.
I'm loving the book. I'm still getting through it. But in the introduction, you do say, interestingly, you don't need to think about Boris Johnson as a great man to agree that he was the most consequential figure of this period. That's right, isn't it? I mean, people have this Boris derangement syndrome, don't they, on left and right? But he did kind of get this done.
Oh, totally. I mean, he is without question the most important figure in this entire period.
And did you rate him? Did you think his defenders say he got the big calls right on Ukraine, on vaccines during COVID, on getting Brexit done? He couldn't do the detail. He couldn't do the hospital. He's going to build 50 of those, police and the rest. He could do the small stuff well, but the big stuff he got right. Is that right on him? Or?
I think broadly that's right, though I would say that doing the small stuff matters in government and accumulates a sense of public dismay when it goes wrong. Look, my view of Boris Johnson is very clear. If you read this book and you want evidence that Boris Johnson is a very significant political character with astonishing campaigning skills, great charisma, brilliant communication, and for brief periods of his intensive activity and ability to focus laser-like and do the important things, then you will find plenty of evidence. If you think he's lazy, disaffected, disengaged, easily distracted, capable of having pointless...
due to the unusual circumstances surrounding its document. A recent UFO sighting at Manchester Airport that has gone viral online has ignited a storm of speculation and intrigue, particularly due to the unusual circumstances surrounding its documentation. A pilot, using the pseudonym Bigelow, reported witnessing and recording a silver orb-shaped UFO near the airport. The object, described as hovering just inches off the ground before shooting skyward at extreme speeds, has sparked widespread debate about its origins and the lengths to which officials might go to keep such sightings under wraps. The pilot's detailed account, coupled with the mysterious suspension of his social media accounts after sharing the footage, has led many to suspect a deliberate cover-up. The sighting reportedly occurred at Manchester Airport while the pilot was seated in his cockpit, preparing for departure. Bigelow described seeing a silver metallic orb hovering a few feet above the ground in an area adjacent to the tarmac. The object was about the size of a small car and appeared to move silently, defying conventional expectations for aircraft or drones. According to Bigelow, the orb remained stationary for several moments, as if observing its surroundings. When airport security personnel approached, the object abruptly accelerated vertically at an unimaginable speed, vanishing from sight within seconds. Such rapid ascension, devoid of any visible propulsion system or accompanying sound, is a hallmark of many documented UFO sightings, further fueling speculation about its nature. Bigelow's description of the event aligns with numerous other reports of orb-shaped UFOs worldwide, often characterized by their reflective surfaces, seamless designs, and advanced maneuverability. The pilot, aware of the skepticism often directed at such claims, decided to share the video footage online to substantiate his account. The plot thickened when, just hours after posting the sighting on Twitter, Bigelow's account was suspended without explanation.
Feuds about nothing and obsessing about things that don't matter. You will find plenty of evidence in this book. This is, I hope, a properly rounded, nuanced picture of Boris Johnson. And if this book is nothing else, I hope it's that, because people resort to hatred or hagiography with Boris Johnson. This is the most rounded and favourable portrait of Boris Johnson that you will find outside of a book written by Boris Johnson or Nadine Dorries, but it is also highly critical in places.
Well, which of those...
Ultimately, he had a great opportunity to remake this country, and he blew it because of some of the ways he behaved and some of the ways he said... as I say, at the end, he was unable to defy the consequences of his own personality, and I think Boris Johnson, in his heart of hearts, knows that, which is why he spent a very great deal of time before this book was published trying to influence what I put in it.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, one of your books is called Fallout. Who have you fallen out with about this book? For example, that story about the Queen would have hurt him, wouldn't it?
It did hurt him. I wouldn't say we've fallen out. It's not for me to reveal conversations, but I think...
He loved the Queen, and you're saying she thought he was an idiot.
He thinks I was sold a pup by the cabinet minister who...
didn't like him much,
who didn't like him, which, is not...
That's always a risk in your game, isn't it?
Of course, it is. But this person has been an impeccable source of mine over multiple years, and I believe that is what the courtier told him. And the fact that I had other evidence from another minister who is, favourably disposed to Johnson suggests that it was of a piece with comments she'd made elsewhere. Yes. So that's why I was prepared to put it in the book. I didn't just rush to put it in for the sake of it. But was he hurt by that? Yes, I had what I describe as a 17-minute moan call from him that Saturday. Yeah. But equally, I've had a communication with him. He's contacted me since to say congratulations on the book and it all seems to be going well. And, Boris Johnson is not generally a grudge holder. And I think he knows if he reads every word of this book that he sees that it's a balanced portrait that fairly approaches what he tried to achieve. So you haven't
fallen out with anybody? I mean, you're not off speakers with anybody off this book. Is there
I don't think Theresa May is putting me on a Christmas card list anytime soon. Book 3 concluded with a chapter entitled Theresa May, A Study in Failure. There are people who get miffed because I take something that somebody else has said
and don't believe them when they say it's not true.
I mean, there are people who are upset that my interpretation of something might not be the same as theirs. But I think everybody can see that I try and approach this as fairly as I can, and that equally there are judgments that go in their favour, and there are equally rude things about almost everybody else.
Some do say that I don't know who your sources are. Some say that some of these books are Cummings' view of history, Dominic Cummings. Do you worry sometimes that people want to, use you to get their version of history out, and that isn't a fair version.
Well, everybody to a degree is trying to do that, which is why I try and speak to absolutely everybody. I mean, for the third and fourth book, I've probably spoken to well over 300 people, and pretty well everybody who we have an insight from has talked to me at some point or another. It is some of this from Dominic Cummings. It's perfectly obvious that it is. He's quoted on the record in the book.
Yes.
I happen to think that what he and Johnson did in the second half of 2019 was a masterclass in political strategy and execution. If Dominic Cummings thinks I take a similar view about all of what he did for the rest of his time in Downing Street, he's going to be sorely disappointed.
Yes.
So, yes, some of it takes his view of the world, and a lot of it doesn't.
And just finally, Tim Chipman, of the Mount Rushmore of leaders you've covered, Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, Sunak, who do you rate the most of those five?
Look, I think there's different attributes. I think if you're looking for diligence and public service, it's Theresa May and Rishi Sunak. If you're looking for determination and bloody-mindedness, it's Liz Truss. But for me, the two that stand out are David Cameron, who I think clearly had the best temperament for the job, and Boris Johnson, who had the best sort of campaigning ability and communication skills. And those are not sort of a cheap add-on, as a lot of politicians seem to believe. They're absolutely core to the job. And I think those were the two guys with the most potential. And ultimately, Cameron blew it because he put himself in a position against where the public were. And on Brexit, Boris Johnson delivered on Brexit, but then put himself in a position where the public weren't when it came to parties and how he did the handling of his government. And they both are in a division or two above the other three in my book.
Yeah. And just finally, what was the best story that didn't make your book?
Oh, well, that's unprintable, Chopper, and we'll have to go in a future novel rather than a non-fiction tone.
It's the last one, is it? I mean, this is there's a full stop at the end of the Tory 14 years in government. Are you applying a similar gimlet eye to the Labour government?
Well, look, I will continue to do that in the newspaper very regularly. Others are writing a book about Starmer, and my view is that I've kind of done my stretch for now, and I'm keen to go and write some spy fiction or something like that. So that's my plan for book 5. But if the blonde bombshell decides to return, I guess some people will attempt to persuade me to take up my non-fiction keyboard again.
You're yoked to him for your career. Well, there we are. Look, Tim Shipman, thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. It's great to have you here. And as a good friend of mine over the past 14 years, and forever, well done.
Thank you, Chopper. It's been an interesting journey, and it's been good to have you along.
Thank you for listening wherever you are to this podcast or watching it. I tweet at Christopher Hope on X. Tim Shipman is Shippers Unbound. Email me, chopper@gbnews.uk, with any thoughts on what Tim had to say. If you enjoyed our podcast, please tell your friends. If you really enjoyed it, and Tim Shipman certainly has, he's got a free mug from it, at least nothing more than that, or please do leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to help other people find this show. Thanks to the great team of GB News colleagues behind this podcast, Mick Booker, Jeff Marsh, Rebecca Nunes and George McMillan. But most importantly of all, thank you to you for listening. If you want more Chopper in your life, and Tim Shipman does, do catch me during the week on GB News, popping up with news and stories, and at midday on Wednesdays for PMQs Live with Gloria De Piero. And do keep up to date with our best political reporting on the website, gbnews.com. Until next time, from me and Tim, cheerio!
%72% of Somalis here live in social housing compared to 16% of the population overall. In answer to my written question, the department says it's exploring the feasibility of publishing benefits claimed by nationality. This is really important for a proper debate on both benefits policy and immigration policy.
In Britain, as migration has soared since the 1990s, so too has those living in social housing with foreign-born backgrounds, particularly foreign-born household heads. Here's a stat that might shock you. In England and Wales, across the entirety of those two countries, 19.2% of the occupied social housing is taken up by a foreign-born household head. Now, this can rise and fall depending on the locality, from urban and rural areas, and for the most part, the higher percentages are concentrated within English and Welsh cities. But it's in our capital, in London town, where the most stunning statistic comes out. Nearly half, that is 47.6% of the social housing stock is headed by a foreign-born household. In some boroughs, such as Brent and Newham in the east, this percentage rises to that of a supermajority. Now, these statistics and these concerns have been discussed online, particularly by young conservative commentators for some time, but they've escaped national conversation. However, this issue broke into the mainstream just this week when Nick Timothy, the new Tory MP for West Suffolk, raised in Parliament that 72% of Somalis in England and Wales live in social housing, compared to 16% of the population overall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the census, 72% of Somalis here live in social housing, compared to 16% of the population overall. In answer to my written question, the Department says it's exploring the feasibility of publishing benefits claimed by nationality. This is really important for a proper debate on both benefits policy and immigration policy. Can the Minister confirm that that work is going ahead and tell us when that data will be published?
The honourable gentleman will be aware that nationality and country of origin are not factors in assessing benefit eligibility. It may well be that we look to this in the future.
Let's go through that stat one more time. 72% of Somalis in England and Wales live in social housing, compared to 16% of the population overall. Obviously, that is a vast gap. Now, Nick Timothy in Parliament said that he desperately was searching for proper data on benefits claimed by nationality so that we can have better informed debates on policy, on migration and welfare. Now, we've also heard from Rupert Lowe, the newly elected Reform MP, who's argued that nationality data must be published in full when it comes to tax contributions, welfare claims, criminal sentencing, and also, of course, on social housing. He said that we must demand full transparency and more information. Neil O'Brien, a senior Tory MP, a former minister, has been battling on this issue for many years. He said that HM's Revenue and Customs used to publish fuller data on the amount of tax paid by nationality, which also was lumped with data on tax credit and child benefit claims. Neil O'Brien has regularly referred to that data, but at the start of December last year, he was told that HMRC would be discontinuing that information. It won't be published ever again. He's also said, Mr. O'Brien, that the DWP, the Department for Work and Pensions, has also made a decision to stop publishing data on welfare claims by nationality. So I'm asking today, here for GB News, are we hiding the real truth about the immigration data problems facing this country? Is there a government-led, either a conspiracy, a cover-up, or just pure laziness to avoid the information, preventing that transparent, open and frank debate from taking place?
A clip following the assisted dying bill of Starmer going across to chat to Farage has been released and is doing the rounds, and it's safe to say it has got people talking. Some people, mainly British patriots, are not happy. Some see it as Starmer being scared, and then others have different theories. In today's video, we will watch the clip, react, and see what people are saying about it. Before we get into today's video, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel and join our fast-growing community. Just a quick one to say we have new Stuck Farmer t-shirts available on our store. Go grab them now. They are available at britishstand.com or check the link in the description. So as stated after the assisted dying bill, for the first time, Starmer crossed over to the other side to speak with Farage. Have a watch. So, as previously mentioned, a lot of people have different theories of what is going on. Some aren't happy. Users like James said this. Do you all see it now? It's all one big game, and they're playing us all. It's not been a good week for Farage. Starmer is the man responsible for good men and women languishing in jail cells, and Farage is all matey with him. This user said, Farage is putting me off reform more and more as each week passes. Pavi said, Nigel Farage is controlled opposition, whilst he is better than the rest. He is unfortunately certainly not the saviour. Many freedom fighters in the UK think that he is. This user said, explain that one at Nigel Farage. It certainly looks like two cheeks of the same ass to me, whilst there was a lot of criticism like this. Some users came in support of Farage, Rob said. FYI. There's nothing in that video to indicate that Farage was friendly with him in any way. He didn't shake his hand. He looked like he was telling him something straight and not laughing, joking with him. Jacko said, Nigel is clearly talking down to Starmer. No handshake, turning away at the end. Certainly doesn't look a friendly conversation. This guy said, Starmer walked across the room to Farage. What do you expect Farage to do? Chin him? With comments like that, it's clear how you voted. Paula said, don't be ridiculous. They don't have to hate each other. They are political opposites and are fighting each other's policies. There are more ways to skin a cat. Being civil is the backbone of democracy. So as you can see, a lot of reform voters are currently split. Where do you lie on this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. In other news, Reform UK leader Richard Tice has revealed that the assisted dying bill marked the first time he and Nigel Farage have found themselves on opposing sides of a political issue. I think it's probably the first time we've ever ended up on opposing sides on an issue like this, Tice told the media, following today's historic Commons vote. The two prominent political figures split their votes on the controversial legislation, with Tice supporting the bill, while Nigel voted against it. We've had a good chat about it, Tice said, highlighting the significance of their rare disagreement on a major policy matter. The historic vote saw MPs back the assisted dying bill by 330 to 275, a majority of 55, in the first Commons vote on the issue in nearly a decade. The bill, introduced by Labour MP Kim Leadbeater, would permit terminally ill adults with less than 6 months to live to end their lives. Members of Parliament were given a free vote on conscience grounds, rather than following party lines. The debate lasted more than 4 hours, with MPs from both sides sharing personal stories in a packed chamber. More than 160 MPs requested to speak, though many were unable to due to time constraints. Tice reflected positively on the nature of the political discourse surrounding the bill. Actually, that was a really good thing. It was not party-based, shouty-type politics, he told GB News. It was reflective, it was thoughtful, it was quality. Maybe we should have a bit more of that on other key issues, he added. The Reform UK deputy leader praised the considered approach to the debate, suggesting it could serve as a model for discussing other significant political matters. It was a very significant moment, but it was just a step in the process, Tice concluded. The bill will now face extensive scrutiny in committee stage, where MPs can table amendments. A motion was approved on Friday giving the committee considering the bill power to send for people, papers and records as part of its sessions. The legislation requires approval from both the House of Commons and House of Lords before becoming law, with any changes unlikely before next year. According to Leadbeater, it would take approximately 2 additional years from that point to establish an assisted dying service. The bill's passage marks just one step in what promises to be a lengthy legislative journey.
Morning, Christo. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to us this morning. So, I mean, really simple point there from Leo in Woking saying, look, would you be happy to see our green and pleasant land becoming a sea of concrete to house a population explosion like this? Whether the figure is 900,000, whether the revised figure down to knocking on £750,000 is accurate, 750,000 people is accurate. The year before, similar, 700,000 people. Just without it being ideological, without it being left or right, simply housing those people, right, is going to put a strain on the population that is negative and is a huge negative consequence of the number of people that come here.
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward mathematical equation when you really think about it. If you look at the number of houses that we build on average per year, it's only about 200,000, sometimes slightly more, sometimes slightly less. And then you see that we're letting in 900,000 net each year at the moment, and 700,000 the year after that. You realise that we are effectively compounding some of the problems that are really plaguing, some of the systemic problems that are really plaguing Britain. It's not just housing, obviously. We also have a creaking NHS. We have creaking school places. We have people struggling to get places with dentists. And the fact that a lot of those that are coming into the country aren't coming into work. I think the statistics suggest that only about 20% of those that came in last year actually came in on a work visa. Many more came as dependents and many more came as students. You realise that we're not just compounding the population crisis, but we're also compounding the economic crisis. GDP per capita has been in a period of stagnation. And if we're bringing in people that are taking out more from the exchequer than they're putting in, that doesn't help us grow the economy. That doesn't help improve people's living standards. So I think finally, and you saw this with the press conference that Keir Starmer gave and the responses that journalists were giving to his speech, that I think the penny is finally starting to drop in Westminster that we can't carry on like this.
I will, though, say that a lot of people quote not GDP per capita, but GDP in general. And GDP in general, as a result of the population going up, and I absolutely take your points about the infrastructure, and there are many other facets to that we can talk about, GDP in general has gone up massively, partly due to immigration. I think that I quoted in the last part, I think 6 billion a year or so is what is generally quoted, I think, as the benefit of immigration to the tax take, as in almost profit, I suppose, is a better way of putting it, for immigration. Does that compel you at all? Do you look at that argument and think, well, actually, there is a financial benefit? It might not be evenly spread among everyone that comes here. It might not be everyone that contributes that way. But overall, the financial benefit to the tax take of immigration means that actually it's worthwhile.
The key is to look at the composition of those that are coming. And the statistics suggest that it was about 86% of those that arrived were non-EU, EEA migrants. And that's an important distinction to make, because those that come from outside of Europe are far more likely to be entering those low-wage roles where they are actually paying less in tax than they are taking out. They're more likely to bring dependents who are making no economic contribution. And then, most importantly, they're more likely to stay at the end of their work visa and thus become eligible for benefits of all kinds of universal credit, child maintenance, and so forth. So, you know, back in 2013, 2014, before the Brexit referendum, our makeup was slightly more geared towards those from Western Europe, although obviously we had problems with accession countries from Eastern Europe later on down the line. But the huge change that we've seen in the composition of those coming into the UK is a big problem. And it's important to bear in mind that in 2018, the UK's official kind of immigration advisors, it's called the Migration Advisory Committee, commissioned a report by a group called Oxford Economics, which found that non-EU migrants are overwhelmingly more likely to impose a net cost. And I think the figure they arrived at was about £9 billion per year. Of course, look, if you bring in over 1 million people per year, you are going to artificially grow your GDP. That's inevitable fact. And that doesn't matter whether they're earning £12,000 a year or £50,000 a year. So that's a false premise, as it were, to effectively rely on the overall GDP picture. The one that really matters to the British public is their quality of life improving? And the answer for most people is it's not.
It's an interesting argument about all of this, because I suppose what you are saying is it's about quality, not quantity. So you're not, I don't know, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but you're not saying no immigration. You're saying that we need to really hone out the quality of people that are coming, i.e. prepared to be a net contributor, prepared to perhaps earn enough to make a significant tax contribution, rather than those people who will end up being a net drain.
Yeah, and so that's about 20% of those that are coming in on work visas are likely to be offering some form of economic benefit. I think where we've reached the problem that we've reached now, though, is that we've been going down this route for far too long, and the big capital crisis that we're seeing, our infrastructure simply hasn't grown in proportion to the huge population increase that we have seen, that we really need to think about whether we can afford to even indulge in having a salary threshold of, say, 50,000, or whether we really need to just start focusing on those incredibly exceptional individuals on the 80, 90,000 pound salary mark. And unfortunately, the conversation doesn't seem to be anywhere near just delineating those exceptional individuals, and it seems to be more focusing on plugging over gaps that we've created ourselves in our own workforce.
But the problem that we have with this, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, but the problem that we have is that we have... This is not actually a story about immigration. I mean, it is on the surface, but this is actually a story about infrastructure, housing, but also the culture we have in this country of certain jobs, certain skills, certain practices being seen as foreign. And for decades now, we have outsourced to foreign labour certain jobs that has perpetuated those jobs being low paid. We've seen the erosion of workers' rights in the 80s under Thatcher, which I think many people supported, but of course that was never done with the view that there would be a huge amount of immigration in the future. So companies have got away with paying extremely low wages, which has perpetuated British people saying, well, actually, those jobs are low paid, low skilled, they're not jobs that we'd want to take, which has meant we've needed more people from abroad to fill those roles, which has put more of a strain on infrastructure, which has meant that even if wages have gone up, they have not been actually able to pay for their housing and all of these sorts of things. So we have been in this cycle where to solve it, you would need to improve wages. You would need to improve training so that we are not outsourcing a lot of those jobs, i.e., builders, carpenters, plumbers, all of those things.
The care home sector being the big example.
Care sector,
but
NHS. So I guess my question is, after that very long diatribe, isn't this a 30-year problem to solve?
I don't think it is. I think it's quite dismissive to suggest that Brits would still turn their nose up, as to use the care home example, to working in a care home. I think there was a report by the King's Trust that suggested, Brits would go into that role, but they are just simply not able to because of the lack of incentive to do so, because of the incredibly low wages that have been compounded by immigration. And this is the kind of question we need to be asking: how can we incentivise those care homes to stop, and those companies that own the care homes to stop paying themselves millions of pounds in dividends each year, and to recognise that they have not just a duty to their profit margins and to their shareholders, but they actually have a wider duty to society to help get those 2.3 million that are on long-term sickness benefit, the 9 million that are economically inactive.
With respect, Robert, you're asking capitalists to become sort of social justice warriors, and I think that that's completely unrealistic. You can't expect a business that is a care home or any other type of business. We could be talking about restaurants here when it comes to wait staff. We could be talking about, many other industries here. You can't expect them to overnight say, right, we're now going to pay higher wages and train up British people because we need to phase out having people from abroad. They're going to keep...
If you go, right, that's it, you've had your fun. We saw this with the HGV driver crisis. Obviously, there was certain issues after we left the European Union, and there were concerns that we weren't able to attract enough talent from overseas. And what actually had to happen was that those that were driving trucks had to be paid more in the end. Those British workers driving trucks had to be paid more in the end. And unfortunately, we're stuck in a situation where there's a tension between, it's far too easy for those companies to just reach for that lever and to say, well, we need mass migration because we can't simply...
I agree with the principle of what you're saying as in the solution, but what I'm saying is that if it was phased in as quickly as you are suggesting, it would lead to a huge amount of inflation because wages would suddenly have to go up overnight. It would lead to consumers needing to pay more for things because that would be how businesses would end up trying to recoup that, which again would lead to inflation. And also you would see businesses potentially going bankrupt because they couldn't afford to raise those wages. So I think that's one of the reasons. And also you need to have the time to train people to fill those roles. So whilst I agree with the principle of where you're trying to get to, this is the reason why I think it's going to take a few decades, because it's got to be a long-term phasing in of these things.
So look, we've got people now that have come in under the so-called Boris wave. We've had people coming in under the Conservative government until June of this year. They are eligible to stay on their work visas for up to 5 years. That's how long they have before they can then apply for settled status. We can't do anything about them, those that are already here. What we can say is that we've got a 5-year off-ramp now, through which time we need to really focus on minds. We really need to start rectifying those issues in the British workforce. I think the argument about inflation was, of course, a line used by a senior Conservative politician to much chastisement as well. I think it's, there is obviously economic arguments that would lay that out somewhat, but I think we need to realise that the priority here has to be getting in 9 million people that are not working. I mean, what does that do for inflation if we have people that are being paid large amounts of money that aren't actually making any contribution as well? So as you say, there are a whole myriad of problems that come from this, and this is arguably the crisis that has been dropped on our doorstep. The fact that we have gone down this route for so long now, we've had our economy weaned onto low-skilled, low-wage labour for far too long, and it will be like turning the Titanic, but we have to do it because we are heading towards the iceberg.
Yeah, true, but they didn't manage to turn the Titanic because it was so big and was going to take so long to turn. So again, I agree with your sentiment. I just think that you and I disagree on the realism of the timeline. Just one final question. Why do you think this has been going? I mean, my God, I've been doing this job now for 20 years, and I could have had this debate 20 years ago. I could be sitting here in a studio in 2004 when I started and have this conversation. I remember it being, and that wasn't new then. This has gone on for as many decades as I think it will take to solve it. Why do you think that we've heard so much from politicians on this, and they know how much of a political benefit it would be if someone actually solved this? Why have political parties on both sides never solved this?
I think it's an issue of where they're getting their advice from and the voices that they're most exposed to whilst in government. I think you look at those kind of associations, those trade associations that are able to effectively coordinate their position and effectively able to speak with one voice, saying our sector needs this mass migration, our sector needs this visa route liberalising, whereas those of us with concerns about the route that we've gone down, we're more spread out across the country. We don't have a sector that we can lobby on behalf of. We can only lobby on behalf of our country and the overall economic decline that we can see. And I think the problem is that ministers for far too long have been prepared to be guided by those shouting at them and those responding to consultations rather than following the promises that they made to British public at election after election.
I understand what you're saying, and also sort of the easy route, isn't it, to say, right, well, OK, we can pacify business. Business is what's important. Business don't mind paying low wages. It benefits business to bring people in this way. It benefits GDP to bring people in this way when it comes to the sort of the figures on a piece of paper, without actually perhaps joining the dots and looking at the wider issues that come from it. Really interesting conversation. Thank you. Robert Bates, Research Director for the Centre for Migration Control.
Morning. Hello, Chris.
So, look, we've spent a lot of time talking about it this morning, but I feel that we should just round off the debate about the assisted dying bill. I'm not sure if you heard both of the guests that we just had on about that. Really compelling arguments from Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Romaine saying, look, this bill is about someone who is terminally ill. It is very similar to what they're doing in Oregon in the United States, where, there are many, many safeguards in place. You have to be terminally ill already. This is not assisted suicide. It is ending your death early. Michael Phillips, though, lawyer at Christian Concern, saying, well, actually, this is how all legislation starts. There's always a mission creep. You always start with perhaps something that sounds reasonable, but it ends up that we could end up like some of these countries like the Netherlands or various others, where you end up being able to have a state-sanctioned end of your life because you've got a mental health problem or because you've got a medical condition that is unpleasant. Mike, where do you stand on this?
I mean, it hasn't become law yet. MPs voted for its second reading, which is very difficult to get a bill past that stage. It's a backbench bill. It's not a government bill. So the campaigners, the movement Kim led by, to have won an extraordinary victory for their side of the argument here. But if you look at the votes, Christo, it's not even split across party lines. I mean, around half of Labour MPs backed it, 150 voted against. The Conservatives also split, Lib Dems split. The only party that backed it in its entirety were the Greens.
So there are only 4 of them, right?
And there's only 4, and it's a very... The Reform split 3-2. Nigel Farage voting against. It's fascinating to see how it divides people.
Well, this is the interesting thing. If you look at it, it speaks to the ideological divides within the parties. So if you look at the Conservatives, it's split along libertarian and socially conservative lines, and on the Labor Party, it's split along progressives and old school socialists. And so it'll be interesting to see how those different strands ascend or in the coming...
Which is which, though, out of those?
So, for example, I'm on the right of politics, I'm a libertarian, and I support this measure. I come from that old belief that you should be allowed to do what you want to do
and
to the
nothing
extent
to
it doesn't
do with
hurt
the
other
state,
people. And it's nothing to do with the state. And I think this is refreshing, right? Because we live in an age and in a country where our rights are being slowly chipped away at by the state day by day by day, and this is a very rare moment where the state has actually said we're going to take a step back. It actually flies in the face of so many other instances in society today.
Although the state are taking a step back, and I actually agree with the ideological principles that you just outlined, the state are still involved in so much as the safeguards and the administration of that via a judge and via doctors and via the NHS. That is the state being involved. And we've seen many examples when it comes to do not resuscitate, when we've seen end-of-life care, where we've seen people who are going into hospitals or doctors to get better, where the state has utterly screwed up. So isn't that a massive concern, that although ideologically the state aren't involved, when it comes to the practice, the state has a great reputation, or should I say bad reputation, for screwing it up monumentally?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. Of course, it's going to be a concern, and this isn't going to be absolutely perfect. But the fact is, if there wasn't some level of safeguards in place, there wouldn't be public trust in this particular policy.
But the state is really bad sometimes at some of those safeguards.
Well, the split is fascinating. So if you look at the polling done by More in Common on this, 3/4 of people said that they wanted the government or the NHS to have some sort of role in delivering it if it was passed. That was across the spectrum. But the same proportion of people said they didn't think the NHS was fit for purpose. And this really provokes, quite a difficult thing in terms of how it might be implemented, because you have a health secretary who's against it. You have an NHS that's currently struggling with resources.
And a justice secretary against it.
Yes, I mean, it's going to be a very tricky thing to do. And the government's trying to reform the NHS at the same time. But it just highlights how people expect the state to get out of the way, but also enable their choices as well. And that's a very different thing to what's happened, say, in Australia, where it's largely a private provision in that sense too. We're probably the most state-involved country implementing this measure, and it's going to be very difficult to get it right, I would say, Christo.
And this is the big concern I have, because I ideologically agree with it, but I have absolutely no faith in our politicians or our public services to deliver it in a way that won't absolutely screw it up. And that's... you could repeat that probably on most issues that I believe in, but this is death. It's a really important issue.
I mean, at the moment, this highlights, I think, the fact that although the NHS was created with the idea of cradle to grave, actually end-of-life care has fallen behind. I think
Do you support this?
Look, I don't take a view one way or the other, because I actually work in healthcare.
Get off the fence.
So I'm going to say, look, I think it's far too complicated. I've heard compelling arguments.
Because I've heard people who've worked in healthcare that have messaged this morning who have a definitive view. One person who works in healthcare saying I'm against it. One person.
It's not worth me taking a definitive view for or against. But I think what concerns me is how it will be implemented if it passes, because at the moment it's got to go through a very lengthy procedure, and this bill is mainly concerned with how the process will work. The safeguarding.
It's only given 5 hours yesterday.
It will have about 16 to 20 hours maybe in committee, 40 hours in committee in the spring. It might become law within a year, implemented by 2027, 2028 at most. But it won't. There needs to be a whole separate piece of work done by the Department for Health, done by the government, done by a health secretary who doesn't believe in it, in order to make it work. And that's going to be a hard thing for West Streeting to do, I think. And the real question is he going to be comfortable doing this? Will Keir Starmer have another cabinet resignation in 6 months' time over this?
But then this is one of those occasions where actually I I think that maybe there is some validity to him not believing in it, because that means that he will be belt and braces.
I hope so,
Do you
yeah.
know what I mean? I hope that he is able to say, right, I don't believe in this, so therefore I've got to make sure that in order for this to go through, there are those absolute extra protections so that I can live with myself with this happening.
And I think Kim Ledbetter has made it clear that she wants to strengthen the bill. And look, I don't think Parliament will pass a bill that they're not happy with. And we don't know how the bill can still be amended by MPs. MPs might vote it down. It can then be extensively amended by the House of Lords. I don't think this is going to be rushed through the parliamentary process, mainly because it doesn't have government time. The government will be involved, but they're not backing the bill unequivocally, which is unusual for them with private members' bills. A lot of times they do pick it up, even though the Prime Minister is in favour. We have to remember about 2/3 of the Cabinet supported it, a third voted against. This is going to be a very interesting legal process, parliamentary process debate for this becoming law. But it does put a lot of pressure on the MPs that are pushing this through.
It's really interesting as well that some of the messages that I've got as a result of the debate before both of you, think of the worst pain you've ever suffered in your life, says Gary, however fleeting that may have been, and then imagine having to spend your final days, your final months, or even having to live with years in that pain, unable to end your own life with nobody else able to legally end it for you. What right does the state or religious zealots like Michael Phillips, our guest at the start of this hour, have to say that you must live like that? If the state or an individual were inflicting that degree of pain on you, a court would deem that to be a crime. I don't see how preventing you from ending that suffering yourself is any different. It's a crime, so the law needs to change. And Sean says it's such an individual issue. I'm extremely torn as to what is the correct answer. Is it not cruel to keep someone alive if they're nearing the end of their life and suffering terribly? We don't allow our pets and animals to suffer. That's considered humane. However, will there be people that take advantage of this rule for their own selfish gain? Absolutely. I really don't think I trust politicians to make this decision. They're not qualified and have proved time and again they only do things for political reasons. It's foolish to think that doctors don't do a form of this already in palliative care, knowing the amount of drugs administered for pain relief will eventually kill that person, says Sean. Or, of course, withdrawing sort of, food and water sometimes. I mean, we've seen that before, where that sort of ends up being a horrible death, but it is a way in which someone's life ends up ending. Now, we saw this week, it would have been discussed endlessly, I'm sure, but it is such a massive story, and that is the immigration figures and the fact that we have seen record figures once again. Keir Starmer has vowed graft, not gimmicks, to drive down net migration, 906,000 in the year up to June 2023. Positive or negative effect on the United Kingdom? I'll start with you, Will Kingston.
It is an existential threat to the United Kingdom.
Am I detecting an accent there?
It is an Australian accent, and that is relevant to this conversation because
Why?
Because Australia is, well, we've got to break this down into legal migration and illegal migration. Australia is one of the few countries that actually got illegal migration under control when they were in a very similar position to the UK in the early 2010s. We had an illegal boats crisis in that period, and what you need to have a government with the guts to actually A, turn back boats, and B, embrace offshore processing. It requires political will, and it's a political will which I don't think this Labor Party has.
Why did you come to the UK?
Because I have an enduring faith in this country's values, in this country's history, in this country's culture, and I think all of those things are under threat by unchecked mass migration.
Yes, however, the figures for the illegal migration, for people who come over on small boats and stuff, usually make up about sort of 3% of the legal migration figures. They're always massively, much higher. There will be people watching along today saying, well, hang on, this fella who is saying that migration is a massive threat to the United Kingdom, and of course there are many arguments about infrastructure and number of people and all those things, what are you doing here?
Yeah, two responses. Number one, I contribute to the economy in the way that most migrants don't. Number two, I embrace this country's history and its values in a way that many migrants don't. This is not about whether or not migration is a good or a bad thing. It's about how much migration you have, it's about how quickly you have it, and it's about where people are coming from. I come from a country which shares the values of the United Kingdom. Unfortunately, we are bringing too many people into this country that don't share our values, that don't share our belief in Western liberal democracy, and you are seeing the cultural cohesion fray at the seams as a result of that. That's how we need to frame this debate. Unfortunately, too many people are scared to say that we should be bringing in people who will contribute and who believe what we believe. Instead,
Mike, are you one of those people? Do you think that we should?
I mean, I have to confess, although I have an English accent, I have a very international background. I've got a French great-grandfather. I've got a family in America, Australia as well. So, you know, in terms of, like, in that sense, I am a product of different waves of migration into this country. The figures are, quite frankly, astonishing, and I think it does put pressure on Keir. I mean, look, just to say, if you've doubt Will's pages, his phone background is Winston Churchill. I can see it from here as well. Deeply, the man's probably more patriotic than I am. But for me, I think this underlines the fact that the record figures were partly contributed by certain schemes for Hong Kong, Ukraine coming in as well. Hopefully, if Donald Trump brings back his promise to resolve the war there, we'll see the figures drop off. They fell by 200,000 for 2023-2024 to June. That could still be revised up or down.
But that's still 728,000.
And we also have to question if these figures are entirely correct. You know, they may be under-reporting as well. There may be more than that. And
if anything, they're higher.
And people probably are not coming asymmetrically into same parts of the country.
Is it a good thing that that many people have come here? Is it a good thing that so many people?
I think it depends on what they're contributing as well to the country. And I live in London. I'm a very big advocate of a diverse and cosmopolitan city. I think it's one of the main reasons why I live here. I've been a supporter of, you know, migration most of my life, but we have to acknowledge that more and more people feel concerned about the levels coming in, and it's certainly becoming fuel for people on the far right. Immigration is consistently cited as a consistent concern.
But isn't that the fault of your side, with respect? Because any time that anyone who has been moderate that has brought up immigration has always been, not by you particularly, maybe, but the left particularly. Let me just finish. Will say someone who has brought up immigration, oh, you are far right. And what that has meant is that those people with moderate concerns are then drawn to the far right because they're the only people who seemingly are saying what needs to be said.
I won't defend the position of the Labour Party on immigration. You know, lone people say that the unchecked migration began under Tony Blair. Gordon Brown was ridiculed for his British jobs to British workers point. Ed Miliband famously carved an immigration pledge into a giant stone. Jeremy Corbyn was ambiguous on it. Keir Starmer is now caught in a position where he represents a very cosmopolitan North London seat, but he also knows that his Home Secretary comes from a Red Wall seat and she will have a very different view on this. And again, I think this highlights the fact that Labour has now stretched itself very thin across the country, and how they reconcile these North London views versus the views of a lot of their traditional voter base, which is probably one of the reasons why Starmer didn't pick up a lot of the votes in the election, is going to be fascinating. Right. We need a root and branch view of our whole immigration policy.
All right, a question for you. One of the big things that is about immigration, whether you're left or right, whether you are pro or anti, is infrastructure. And I think if you are someone in one of those red wall seats, if you're someone who probably voted for Brexit, you are not someone who is going to look at contributions made by immigrants. You're not going to look at GDP figures. You're going to say, I cannot get a doctor's appointment, I cannot get a hospital appointment. Doesn't that mean that again, someone like yourself, lovely fellow, really nice to see you here, coming here and putting on a strain on infrastructure, people aren't going to listen and go, my God, you know, but the lovely Will, he's a great contributor, he pays his taxes and he's got British culture. They're going to think someone like Will, legal, great guy, is still going to be taking a doctor or a hospital appointment that I could be having.
Yeah, they'd be wrong. Because... Why? Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, because migration isn't the problem. We should still have some number of migration, but again, it's the people that we are choosing to allow in, and it's the volume of it. Now, without wanting to blow my own trumpet, I think I'm a net contributor to this country. I think I'm a good type of person that you want to have in this country.
What type of people are we bringing in that aren't that?
At the moment, the majority of people that we bring into this country are net detractors. They take out more money from the economy than they put in. So number one, you want skilled migration. You want people who are going to actually be working in, you know, skilled labour that earn an income, that aren't going to be taking welfare benefits, which at the moment a huge proportion of migrants do.
I thought the latest figures, though, showed, and correct me if I'm wrong, that migration And again, this is GDP, and I think GDP is something that someone who can't get a doctor's appointment probably wouldn't care about. But I thought there was sort of a £6 billion benefit in tax to the UK as a result of migration.
I haven't seen those figures, but if it is, it would mean that a small amount of migrants contribute disproportionately compared to the large amount of migrants that don't contribute. And so those large amount of migrants are taking up places in schools, taking up places in hospitals, and that's the problem that you need to address. But unfortunately, at the moment, the UK is so addicted to low-skilled labour, and we've got an economy that relies on low-skilled labour, that we haven't done the hard work to actually reorganise the economy post-Brexit. And that's what the hard work that needs to be done over the next coming years, or else this economy will not be able to handle these numbers.
Absolutely fair point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
I mean, but this is going to take 3 decades to undo, because it's taken 3 decades for us to get here.
I hope we're more agile now, because we're seeing a world in which more and more countries are opting for limiting mobility, more protectionist trade policies, and that means having to look more to our own resources, including our domestic labour supply. Now, Labour this week set out, got quite easily overshadowed by assisted dying, their Get Back to Work plans, which included looking at the fact that we have 3 million people in this country who are off work, sick, or in work with a limiting condition. Now, our GDP productivity figures since 2008 have been consistently falling. We're producing GDP per head lower than we were pre-financial crisis. So we're working longer, harder, we're iller, but we're less productive as well.
They're also talking about us doing 4-day weeks and also, you know, giving massive pay rises to union people who aren't having to work certain days.
I'm pro any policy that gets productivity up and spreads that benefit across the country.
Productivity up? Just giving a pay rise to a train driver that doesn't have to work for
we still have comparatively high employment rates in this country, and interestingly, the employment rights bill that's going through at the moment is projected to actually loosen the labour market by actually putting some people out of work. And that may not necessarily be a bad thing in terms of the macroeconomics of it. It'd be horrible for the people.
But also, you've just had a budget from Rachel Reeves as well, which is going to put more people out of work, because a lot of employers are saying, well, actually, look, this national insurance employers' contribution rise is going to lead to fewer people being able to have a job.
I want to see Labour grapple immigration by the horns, a full-scale review, not just asylum, but, you know, where people are coming in, where they're contributing, where they're going. If people are coming in, why don't we send them to parts of the country that actually maybe need labour, rather than, say, concentrating on the southeast of England as well?
We should be training some of the people in those parts of the country. And we're not. I don't hear a lot of that.
But that pool isn't massive, though. The people out of work in this country isn't a massive pool, though, at the moment.
Let's talk about Louise Hay, the Transport Secretary, who seems to have been, ironically, thrown under a bus. Investigated.
Not a nationalised train.
But not a nationalised train. Well, there wouldn't be a driver driving it because they've probably got a day off. It really irritates me. Staff shortage. I mean, how many times do we see a staff shortage? It's a timetable. Did they not know they needed to be there? Anyway, don't start me. So, what do you think about this story? So, if anyone doesn't know this story, it happened in the last couple of days. Louise Hay resigned as Transport Secretary because the Times newspaper revealed that she was convicted of fraud in a police investigation involving a stolen and missing mobile phone. So what happened was that she was the subject of a victim of a mugging in, I think, 2013. She thought that a work mobile had been stolen within that mugging, but then the work mobile turned up. I think she switched it on. The police managed to find that she'd switched it on, so she was called in to the police. A lawyer at the time, she claims, told her to say no comment, which was quite bad advice, and she ended up with the lowest possible punishment from a magistrate as the result of it, and then declared it when she first stood as an MP. However, she has now been forced to resign after it was all exposed. I mean, is this a massive crisis? Is this as big a story as is being claimed? Is there some hypocrisy here because actually Labour knew about it?
Well, look, this underlines, I think, how Starmer behaves in government. He doesn't expend political capital when he doesn't have to. And Louise Hay...
It's another way of saying he has no principles.
Well, Louise Haig's tenure as former 5-month tenure as Transport Secretary cannot be said to have been an overwhelming success. The Department for Transport got a cut in its resource allocation for the next year's spending review. She had the P&O ferries comments as well. She has been spearheading the public ownership of national rail legislation through too, but she has been at odds with Downing Street, and there is speculation that Starmer's cut her loose now ahead of the expected January reshuffle. So the timing seems very convenient to me. And look, she may come back in a more junior role, but I don't think he's going to lose much sleep over the fact she's not there anymore.
Yeah. So do you think that this was the plan to get rid of her anyway, and this is just a convenient
we have to remember that she was told basically to quit, not by Starmer, but by Morgan McSweeney, who is his chief of staff. Now, when Sue Gray was in, I think soft left cabinet ministers like Rayner, like Haig, had more cover because Sue Gray built more bridges with them, as it were. Morgan McSweeney, however, is much more pro-right, the party.
That's not the heart of the matter here for me. The heart of the matter is based around two questions. One, did he know? And two, what should happen to Starmer if he did know? Now, I think it's almost certain that he did know that this was the case. And, you know, let me do a Starmer, let me kind of admit a few items into evidence. Number one, the way that they've framed this is they're saying further details have come to light. By definition, that means that they knew the nub of the story.
They knew some details
initially.
to start with.
Number two, Westminster talks. It's absolutely absurd to assume that they hadn't heard about this. And number three, the vetting process for senior cabinet positions is extensive. They would have found this out in the vetting process. So I think on balance of probability, Starmer did know. And if he did know, I think he has to resign. He's created this ridiculous standard for himself. He doesn't have values. He doesn't have real strong policy. He doesn't have a vision. So what he relies on is this sort of like moralism, and he's failed that moral test that he set.
I don't... If this was something that she was accused of and like I said, had this punishment for, I have no problem with her becoming a cabinet minister as a result after that happened. The problem I've got is if there was a lie around people knowing. Because there's spent conviction and you can change, and it was not a massive thing, and I don't actually, you know, if we believe what she says, it wasn't, clearly they didn't believe that she was trying to commit a massive fraud. I don't know whether you agree with that, but the problem for me is the lie of Starmer knowing or not knowing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've also heard, though, that we don't know the full story and that actually, A, there may have been a couple of phones involved, and B, this was known in Aviva at the time that this was something that was done. Just say, oh, the phone's been stolen, so I can pick up a new item. And the other thing I would say, and I was speaking to a friend who works in the police force the other day, and they said in their 30 years, they'd never seen anyone being given a criminal record for something which was a genuine mistake. She said it's just very unlikely that if it was a legitimate mistake, the court would not have handled it in that way.
So the police are saying they'd never make a mistake in choosing to prosecute somebody. I find that very hard to believe.
No, I find that. Yeah, well, no, that's not what I said. I said if someone has made a legitimate mistake, an oversight that they didn't know they had the phone, it wouldn't have been treated as a criminal conviction.
Also, she did plead guilty at a magistrate's court, and I would say that, OK, I understand the logic of pleading guilty to sort of get something gone and spent, but I don't think there would be anything that would ever compel me to plead guilty if I genuinely was not guilty.
Not if I'm about to go stand for Parliament in a month's time.
You only survive as a cabinet minister if the Prime Minister backs you. And we saw this when Dominic Cummings was found to have driven to Barnard Castle. Boris Johnson spent huge amounts of his political capital, which was considerable at the time, because he'd just won the election, he had the goodwill of the COVID pandemic response, to keep him in post, giving him a Downing Street press conference. Starmer, in contrast, ran against that sort of sleaze, and he made this rod for his own back with these ministerial standards. So now ministers have to transgress only a small amount, and it was a transgression according to the
Do they?
the
I'm
rules.
sorry, but thousands of pounds worth of clothes?
In Starmer's eyes, they do. And look, but this is the problem, it leads to double standards.
Sounds like he's a little bit selective, though, because
I'm sure he is.
Didn't he himself not declare a load of clothes for his wife? Didn't Rachel Reeves miscategorise a load of clothes that she was
Angela Rayner didn't declare them either.
Angela Rayner didn't declare them either. So this high standard that you're talking about didn't really apply to them.
No, because Starmer's prepared to spend the capital to keep those in post.
That he likes.
Rayner and Reeves are far more valuable to Starmer than a Transport Secretary who jeopardises an £8 billion investment from P&O Ferries by sounding off about something that happened 2 years ago in relation to their trip to
It just goes to show there is such a hollowness to this man. Like, he's created his brand around being moral, around being a rule abider, about being the ex-prosecutor, and we now see that it's just a complete political charade. And the reason why that really hurts is because at least someone like a Boris Johnson, who, you know, kind of was probably...
Well, he never claimed to have any morals.
That's right. And at least he was fun to watch. Whereas there's such a joyless, kind of boring, sad, mediocre element to Starmer that if he also can't even do the straight and narrow thing at the same time, why are you there, mate?
Heidi Alexander has replaced Louise Hay. Now, of course, she's well known to people in London for being one of the deputy mayors, I think, in London
for transport.
Yeah, has said. I remember she sent a tweet at the time saying, "I know absolutely nothing about transport. I'm just kind of learning." She did. There's a tweet out there where she actually said that, and I think that obviously the way in which London is run for transport, when you look at some of the what was implemented under her tenure, that sends chills down my spine that she now has the national brief for that.
Well, I mean, she's going to inherit a sticky wicket with, not just the HS2 legislation going through, rail public ownership, the bus reforms Labour wants to pursue as well. She's also going to have a tricky negotiation.
Well, when they're putting up bus prices.
And also a tricky negotiation for the next spending review settlement, which would relate to capital investment as well.
The buses that other people might be more likely to get that are losing their winter fuel payment, and the buses that they want us to catch because of net zero that they're spending billions on.
I hope she's a better advocate for her department than Louise Haigh was, because Transport secured a cut in real terms for the next year. Actually, we need to be investing, as you said, in infrastructure, in that kind of investment through capital spending
in HS2.
In getting more local transport projects done as well, and hopefully Hadi Alexander will use her experience in London to deliver that. So we'll have to wait.
She delivered cycle lanes in London. She delivered cycle lanes. Bus speeds have never been lower in London. They made bus lanes 24 hours in London, and bus speeds have never been lower. So bus speeds the buses should be flying through at the moment in London, because they're all 24 hour and they've never been slower.
I wonder how she's going to apply this London experience to rural England and the rest of the country.
Well, you know exactly what she'll do. She'll just say, "Oh well, you might be 104 years of age, senile and blind, but get on a bicycle. And if you don't, well, then you're stuck at home, like trying to jog on the spot to warm yourself up because you've got no winter fuel payment." Anyway, it's my blood pressure. Listen, thank you. Anything you want to end on that, Will, because you got the final word?
The only thing I'd say is the little insight there that net zero makes transport policy a huge amount much more difficult, and that goes across pretty much every single cabinet position. We've got to scrap this net zero thing, but maybe that's a separate conversation.
So, this is a religious preacher who's being asked to stop preaching by the police here.
Religion's about truth, not compromising. If we compromise, we're going to fall away. The Bible says it. In the last days, you'll fall away because you're going to compromise. I won't compromise.
No, we was here before them. Okay.
The officer's wearing a gang badge as well.
No, but if
those guys came to me.
I was here.
Listen, they parked themselves.
I was here before.
I'm not saying. I'm not here to get
He was here before then.
I'm not inciting hatred.
No, listen. You incite hatred. I don't care. I obey my father. I want to obey my father. I was here before them.
I'm not doing any of those things.
No.
Therefore, I will ask you respectfully, can you turn it down, allow those gentlemen to pray, and then if you want to work it out with them as to how you go forward and move on,
I'm not going to preach like I've always done.
I know, but just, if you could please just turn it down while we work out.
Okay, we'll turn the volume down a little bit.
What?
You'll turn the volume down a little bit.
Yeah.
But he's saying he was here before the meeting.
No, I know, but I'm not here to get dragged down to
It seems like you're a bit biased.
I'm not biased, mate.
Yeah, it does seem like that.
I've been asked
Who
by those gentlemen over there. It is their time for which they want to pray, okay?
I pray all the time in the spirit.
If that's what you want to do then, mate, you can do that. However, I'm just politely asking you just to turn it down a little bit.
This guy was preaching the word of God.
I would not advise anyone to interact with him anyway. Do what he's doing, we're doing what we're doing. It's a free country, but respectfully, if he doesn't want to get himself into some trouble, then he should be careful what he's saying, because I'm not on a mic talking about Christianity, and if he's going to offend Muslims, there's nothing I can do about that. He's going to bring him to himself.
You can't have...
I'm not trying to spread whatever message he's trying to spread.
I'll go out there.
Yeah, better idea. You're just going to...
How you treat a woman?
Well, some people are listening, but yeah, I know what you're saying.
This is the
All right, God bless, guys.
They want to kill us.
Gonna get a drink. Cheers, lads. Thanks.
Shut up, motherfucker!
If you go further up there, we'll keep an eye on it, yeah?
Yeah.
So, those guys are now being warned for public order offences by the police.
You can start doing it, please. Okay?
We're going up here. Exactly.
no more from you, okay?
Short of neutrality is going to reach a peace agreement. But on the subject of temporarily ceding the land, there is actually there's a possible precedent here in the way that the Western countries, including the UK, treated the Baltic states after the Second World War. They treated them as occupied territory, and they refused to recognize them diplomatically as part of the Soviet Union. Now, this actually made things incredibly simpler when the Soviet Union collapsed, because they could simply be fully recognized and said, well, we never actually didn't recognize the Baltics as independent states. So there is a sort of precedent there which makes it at least possible.
Yeah, it's fascinating, at least a possibility. What about the American aspect of all of this? Because we know that things are changing in regard to Trump. He's made things very clear. Tell us about General Kellogg as well and his potential role in all of this, because there are a lot of people who think that some of the appointments that Trump has put forward are perhaps not the most qualified people, but that is certainly not a charge you could make about Lieutenant General Kellogg.
No, and this is very, very interesting, because before his appointment was announced, there was a suggestion that Trump was going to be all out in favor of abandoning Ukraine. He was going to roll over in the direction of Moscow, and that the status quo in Ukraine would, as it were, with a Russian sort of victory, at least to a degree of Ukrainian territory, that this is what Trump was prepared to sign up for. The appointment of General Kellogg suggests that it's going to be more complicated, and that the US could be, under Trump, could be tougher on Russia and more supportive of Ukraine than was considered likely when Trump won the election. So we'll just have to wait and see. But I think, you know, when Trump talks about ending the war, or at least starting to bring the war to an end within 24 hours, it's quite clear that he and his advisors, and General Kellogg in particular, they have thoughts about this. And it's going to be very, very interesting how far they can persuade not just Zelensky, but Putin as well.
Mary, thank you for that analysis, and I just want to tell you that Jason in the Lake District has been in touch to say Mary Dejevsky is just different gravy. She's the most knowledgeable person I've ever heard speak about the situation. There we are. I agree with you, Jason.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mary. That's Mary Dejevsky there, Foreign Affairs columnist at The Independent. And someone has texted us to say the Chagos Islands were definitely US and UK showing Zelensky that land can change hands diplomatically, long-term game, and had to give an example after the Minsk agreements wouldn't be believed again. Surprise, surprise, says Neil. Trump returning to power, Ukraine cede land. They know Trump will not be funding this war to make USA suits and BlackRock richer. Also, Ukraine have sacrificed all their young men for nothing, says Neil. I wonder if that's how you feel as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We're going to talk in just a second about Alex Salmond's memorial service that is just finishing in Scotland. We're going to try to get Mike Graham on the line, but you know what it's like when you come out of those sort of big events and so on. Sometimes we can make contact, but I've heard we have made contact with Mike Graham, so we'll talk to him. We'll also talk to Michael Blackley, who's political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail. There has been a lot said about Alex Salmond, a friend of this station, former First Minister of Scotland, of course, former leader of the SNP and indeed the Alba Party, and his memorial service has just finished in Scotland, in Edinburgh at St Giles Cathedral today. So we'll reflect on that, and indeed we'll talk about the price of stamps after the break here on Talk.
your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, it's 7 weeks since Alex Salmond died. He was in Macedonia and died of a heart attack. The memorial service was held. In fact, it's just finished at St Giles's Cathedral in Edinburgh. We'll talk to Mike Graham in a minute, who was there, a presenter in this station, obviously. Alex Salmond was someone who appeared on Talk very frequently. In fact, he presented some programmes on Talk from time to time. He's also someone who was debated with people like Mike Graham many times on all sorts of issues. I'd interviewed him on numerous occasions. He'd be in the office and on air from time to time, and someone who really was a friend of this station, gave us analysis, and even if he disagreed with you robustly on many occasions, he was an absolute gent in my experience. Michael Blackley is political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail. Michael, really Scotland's great and good, and indeed beyond, at that service today to pay tribute to Alex Salmond. Just give us a flavour of what went on.
Yes, I mean, the service at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, this was an event happening on St Andrew's Day, quite appropriately. It was a celebration of Alex Salmond's life, many of the things that were important to him. There was plenty Scottish arts and culture and music at the event, and it was attended really by people from across the political spectrum, notably Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister, made it along. The leaders of most of the Scottish parties were there as well. So I think it maybe spoke to a bit of Alex Salmond's life, because as you say, in his discussions that he had with yourselves as broadcasters, with others, he was somebody that did manage to make friends across the political divide. He didn't only speak to people that were nationalists. He was friends with, I mean, one of the examples is that David Davis was there, the Conservative MP, and Alex Salmond really did manage to make friends across the political divide when he was in politics.
I think David Davis actually gave a reading as part of that, so they were genuine friends, certainly. Nicola Sturgeon not in attendance, of course. She was his protege for a long time. They were very close politically, and then it all went horribly wrong for them. There were many allegations, of which Alex Salmond was found not guilty in regard to sexual impropriety. Still, that relationship, even in death, apparently still toxic, or certainly to the extent that she perhaps wouldn't have been welcome. I mean, how would you analyse her lack of attendance, Michael?
Yes, I mean, it's certainly significant that she wasn't there, because this is somebody that she was the protege of Alex Salmond. She was somebody who was extremely close. They were close friends. Alex Salmond was very much an inspiration for her in politics. But in more recent years, the relationship completely fell apart. Nicola Sturgeon didn't attend today. It's understood that she took the view that she wanted to remember Alex Salmond privately rather than appearing in public at either this or any of the other events around his death. Nicola Sturgeon was at the funeral of a Scots comedian, Janie Godley, today. That's a comedian who rose to prominence during the coronavirus pandemic when she did a sort of parody voiceover of Nicola Sturgeon's daily media briefings. And it's perhaps pretty telling that Nicola Sturgeon was attending that instead of Alex Salmond's memorial event. There were some signs of the fact that the independence campaign has splintered at today's event, because when the First Minister and SNP leader John Swinney was entering St Giles Cathedral, there was a bit of booing. There was reference to him being a traitor, according to reports from some in the nationalist crowd. So I think there were some signs there that there is a bit of splintering that's happened in recent years in the independence campaign. And one of the other, as far as I could see, I don't think the only party that didn't have a party leader there appeared to be the Scottish Greens. I could be wrong with that, but as far as I could see, there wasn't representation from the Scottish Greens other than the presiding officer, Alison Johnson.
Well, Michael, thank you for that. That's Michael Blackley, he's political editor of the Scottish Daily Mail. And just on the phone we have, we have him, Envision, Mike Graham, our very own presenter there. We can hear the bagpipes in the background. Mike, you're just out of this memorial service. Was it a fitting tribute to such a giant of Scottish politics, of British politics?
It really was, yeah. I mean, it was absolutely everything that he would have liked. I mean, Kenny McCaskill was possibly, I mean, there were many high points. Kenny McCaskill made a very rousing speech promising that, this was not the end of independence. It was the dream that Alex Salmond had, and they would continue to fight. He got rapturous applause, and even the SNP MPs, led by Stephen Flynn, who was sitting at the back with me, even they were cheering, because there's no love lost between the SNP now and Alex Salmond, of course, but Nicola Sturgeon wasn't here, but there were other SNP MPs here. Gordon Brown was here. There was a song by the Proclaimers. As Kenny McCaskill said, Alex Salmond was probably known as one of the best parliamentarians that ever came from Scotland. And he said he would probably have actually disputed that and said, what do you mean one of? So it was very heartfelt. It was very funny in the same way that Alex Salmond always was. David Davis made a little reading as well. It was just lovely. I'm just really glad I came, because when I got invited, I was thinking, God, a trip all the way to Edinburgh. I had dinner with a friend last night. I'm coming back this afternoon. And I'm just really glad I came, because it was very touching. It was his niece made a beautiful speech about Uncle Alec and what he was like as a family man. It was just really pleasant. As you can see behind me, there's quite a few saltires flying, and quite a few sort of what you might call hardline independence maniacs, who of course I don't get on with. But it's been a lovely occasion.
Well, how will you remember him, Mike? Has today helped you, because he was your mate, wasn't he?
He really was. And I have to say, I've got to thank you actually, Peter, because when I reconnected with Alex Salmond, it was after I met him in our Ealing studios, because you had got him in for an interview, I think, and I hadn't seen him for a few years. And so that was when we kind of rekindled our friendship. And I used to get him on Plank of the Week. He's a very funny man, a great intellectual, loved politics. I mean, he could sort of dance with anybody, if you like, and he really did love what he did. And he was a fantastic orator, a great thinker, a man who could just have fun with people. He used to call me his favourite fascist. And I'm like, it's probably a bit harsh, but I'll take it. And, he was just a really funny guy to be around, and I did a couple of those live shows in the Eyes Have It Edinburgh Festival with John Burko as the speaker in the chair. David Davis was there one night. Mick Lynch was there. Andrew Marr we competed with. He just loved the toing and froing of political discourse,
And he was known, of course, as first and foremost as a politician. But you talked about his niece there. You talked about other people perhaps giving a different flavour of the man behind the scene.
Did we lose you?
Are you still there, Mike?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, sorry, just lost you for a second.
No worries. No, I was just wondering, obviously we knew him first and foremost as a politician, but there are many other strings to his bow, there are many other aspects to his character, and that really appears anyway to have come out of the service today, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, what I didn't know about him was apparently he was quite a good singer. Apparently he was a tenor, and he was a massive football fan as well. He loved Heart of Midlow Hearts was his team, and he was born, of course, in Linlithgow, which you'll forgive me for saying this, because they did say it in the service. When you're born within the bells of St Michael's Church in Linlithgow, the standard bearer of Linlithgow, where Mary Queen of Scots was born, is a black Labrador. So when you are actually born in Linlithgow, you're allowed to call yourself a black bitch.
Wow. Okay. Well, that is in context, so take that off, Colin.
It is. I've said it. Yeah, I've said it before on my show, because it is absolutely in context. And there was a pub with that name as well. I only say it once, so I won't say it again. But just a fantastic history to his life, and a fantastic, just a great credit to him today. A lot of people that were at the service today were not people that agreed with him politically.
Yeah.
I saw Tommy Sheridan, the former sort of firebrand socialist, who I used to be quite good friends with as well. And just, there's something very magical about Edinburgh on these kinds of occasions.
It really does rise to the occasion. Mike, thank you. Yeah. Safe home, and we'll see you on Monday for Morning Glory between 6 and 10 here on Talk. Really appreciate that, Mike. Mike Graham, presenter here at Talk. Of course, he's here back on Monday morning. He'll be back from Scotland in this studio on Monday morning at 6 o'clock between 6 and 10 for Morning Glory. Well, after the break, we're going to talk about the price of Christmas cards. We'll also talk about assisted dying. I know there are some callers who want to get in on that as well. But really, it's interesting on the price of not just Christmas cards, but the postage for wondered as well, there were some surveys done and a little bit of looking around saying that it would actually make more sense financially to actually fly on a cheap airline flight to somewhere like Spain to post your Christmas cards. Well, we'll talk about that with Harry Wallop. He's a consumer expert in just a few minutes here on Talk.
She died 15 years ago of cancer, and for weeks beforehand was in acute pain, mitigated by morphine, which was, yes, self-administered. But if she'd been in a position, I think, frankly, if she'd been asked if she wanted to end her life slightly earlier, she probably would have said yes. That, from a doctor's perspective, you could argue, I think quite convincingly, is actually in accordance with the Hippocratic Oath, on the basis that that patient is saying, I do not want to suffer anymore.
The UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you so much to everybody who has been in touch. Lots of people getting in touch this lunchtime. And just to say, I appreciate all of your messages. We sometimes don't get we often don't get an opportunity to read out every message, but Mike has been in touch and says, talking to Mike Graham actually, saying Mike had a really nice chat that we had after the service for Alex Salmond, a good man of politics gone too soon, says Mike. So thanks very, very much indeed for that. We're talking about assisted dying today. That's the really big issue, I suppose, that's still, even yesterday we had that vote in Parliament, 330 MPs voting for it, 275 voting against. And I know that Fee in Berkshire, who's been in touch, has some thoughts on this. Fee, thanks for the call, 0344 499 1000. I wonder, what do you make of what the parliamentarians have now done?
Hi, Peter.
Hi,
hi. I just wanted to put a view across that I'm grateful for it being voted in. I'm in my 50s. I'm not married. I don't have children. And I like to know that at a time of my life, should anything happen and I get diagnosed with a terminal illness, that I know will eventually kill me, and I would be struggling and suffering in pain towards the end, that I would be able to make a conscious decision to decide to go with dignity without worrying about losing my faculties, my bodily functions, or anything like that. So for me, on a personal level, I'm grateful. I've also witnessed my brother who, from 2 suicide attempts, the second one, both of them failed, but the second one, he lost so much blood, he ended up with brain damage. Obviously, not a terminal illness, but he suffered for 2.5 years where he was fed by a tube, couldn't do anything, and it was literally just waiting for his organs.
I'm so sorry to hear about that, Fee. I mean, that just sounds like a horrendous thing to witness. I mean, this legislation actually wouldn't cover that necessarily.
No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't in that circumstance.
Do you think it should go further to cover those? Sorry to interrupt you, Fee. Do you think it should go further to actually cover those circumstances, perhaps?
No, I not necessarily. I don't know. It depends on the individual circumstances, but I think this is the start. So as long as the legislation is in place to obviously protect the vulnerable, I mean, the evidence was there in my brother's situation with a suicide note and a recording, and he just couldn't go on, and obviously he was found, he still had a pulse, and he survived, but unfortunately with 0% capacity. So his life was just miserable, and he was conscious, he knew what was going on, but his existence was just horrendous. Heartbreaking to deal with, but I think if you are given the prognosis that you know for sure that you have a health condition that means that your life is come to an end at some point and you are going to be suffering towards that end, then I'm grateful for me in the future, should anything happen, to be able to have that choice.
Do you feel the safeguards are definitely there, Fee, with this legislation? Because there are people who worry that this is a slippery slope, who worry that people would be cajoled or even just guilted into it, or, you know, you don't want to be a burden to your family. And some people don't want to be a burden to their family, and I understand that. But this kind of idea that life is expendable and that, you know, it'll reach a stage where actually people might say, well, I don't want my child or you know, offspring to give up work or whatever to look after me. I just wonder whether the fact that this option is there will have negative consequences as well.
Potentially it could, and again, I think it's down to individual level, but I think this is where the hard work starts. This is where the government now needs to make sure they put thorough safeguarding governance in the legislation that they build around this being voted in now to protect those that are vulnerable. We can learn from the other countries that have had this legislation legal for years before. So let's take what bad experiences have happened in those societies and learn from them and see how we can also balance and protect the vulnerable from such circumstances, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense, Fee. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts there, Fee, in Berkshire. On Alex Salmond, Nick Moore has been in touch and says, whilst I didn't agree politically with Alex Salmond, I respected him immensely as a behemoth of the political world and a great statesman who conducted his politics with a great deal of dignity and skill, something our current political minnows could learn from, says Nick Moore. And Adam has asked whether Nicola Sturgeon was there. No, she wasn't, Adam. We did talk about that a little bit, but no, she decided not to go. Clearly she was a sort of protege of Alex Salmond, and then it all went horribly wrong. Their relationship became very, very toxic, so she decided not to go to the memorial service. Well, Christmas is just around the corner. It's in less than a month, and if you, like me, are writing your Christmas cards at the moment, maybe a little bit early, perhaps, quite many people a bit less perhaps prepared, but I like to send them on the first working day of December because I'm just a bit like that. So I have a big pile of Christmas cards, some written, some not. I send about 100 of them, and often to people who I'm maybe not in contact with a lot, or just want to drop them a line, or people who might appreciate a Christmas card. But it's becoming more and more expensive, and Harry Wallop is a consumer expert and joins me now. Harry, do you still send Christmas cards? Because there's a lot of people saying actually it's becoming a bit too expensive these days with the postage.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly expensive. So a first-class stamp has now gone up to £1.65, which is an astonishingly large sum of money. I was looking back at sort of inflation. So a first-class stamp 40 years ago, I can remember this, I'm old enough, it was 17 pence. Now, if a stamp had sort of kept track with inflation and a track overall inflation, that 17 pence first-class stamp would now be worth 69 pence. But it's not. It's £1.65. So stamp prices have galloped ahead of inflation. And, yeah, understandably, lots of people just are giving up on Christmas cards. I do actually send them, but I'm going to be honest, it's actually it's my wife who sends them, and I just get handed the card over, and I have to occasionally write a message. But she's in charge, and I think she now uses second-class stamps.
I certainly use second-class stamps, although I do send a few international ones to various people around the world. And often it's the only sort of communication I have with those people, but I try to, write a little message about what's happened that year or whatever. But that's gone up from, I think I'm right in saying that last year it was £2.20 for an international stamp for a card, and now it's £2.80, which again is a massive leap. How can Royal Mail get away with these huge increases, these inflation-busting increases of stamps that you're talking about? That if you're sending even 10 cards, I mean, I send about 100. It is. I went to pay for the stamps and just thought, actually, I could have done what some people suggest, which is fly to somewhere like the Isle of Man or Spain or wherever, where you can send these cards for a lot less money.
Yeah, though, the Times newspaper did a sort of fun story last week, which said that you could fly off to Lisbon on a day trip. I mean, quite a tiring day trip, I might add. Yes. 70 cards was the limit. Then you get your money back. You could cover the cost of the flight. And I think 100 cards, if you could fly off to Milan. But you'd have enough over. You'd still make enough to have a modest lunch and a drink before flying back to the UK. Yeah, I mean, the reason why Royal Mail keep on jacking up the price of stamps is because they say they're in financial trouble, which is sort of true. They are not doing very well. And crucially, the bit of the business that is doing really badly is letter volumes. So about 20 years ago, 2004, 2005, there were 20 billion letters sent in the UK. Most recent figures, it's 7 billion. So letter volumes have collapsed for very obvious reasons, which is, a lot of correspondence is now done by email or even by WhatsApp or, various social media things. So the Royal Mail has just not got as much revenue. I mean, it has a lot of parcels, which is doing okay, but under a lot of competition.
Yeah, lots of different parcel companies as well. Some of them are absolutely useless, as we all know. But I would.
Some not. So some actually getting a lot better. I think the really dark days of having your parcel kind of thrown over the garden fence, smashing. I think they're. Those that feels like quite an old story. I think it has improved, especially with the whole kind of click and collect. So you can go and pick up your parcel from the corner shop. I think that has got a bit better.
And at least they take a picture now usually, and it comes up on your phone exactly where it is. If they've put it, behind a bin or underneath a what do you call them? You wipe their feet on them. Doormat. That's the word I was looking for. Couldn't remember that. I mean, do you think there's something? Do you have any emotional attachment to Christmas cards? Do you care whether you get them or not? Do you think any more or less of someone if you receive them, Harry?
Well, of course, the real killer is someone who you always get a Christmas card from, and then they suddenly drop off. You've been dropped off the list.
Yeah.
What's happened there?
Well, I have a rule, Harry. I have a rule that if the person doesn't send the Christmas card back to me 2 years running, they're off the list. They're cold.
Well, I've had that rule. They were cold, and then I came back onto their list, and then I looked like the mean person and stopped giving card. The etiquette of Christmas cards is unbelievable. I love a nice Christmas card because they can be beautiful objects, and I actually string them up on a piece of ribbon, around the sitting room, and it's a form of Christmas decoration. So I have noticed, because I know where the ribbon starts and where it finishes, whether we have fewer cards than the year before. There was actually a brief during lockdowns when we just couldn't go out and see people and go to parties. Christmas cards did enjoy a modest renaissance. They did go up then. More people sent Christmas cards. I mean, I think they do have a purpose. They're a wonderfully old, analog way of, wishing people happy Christmas. I know it's very transactional, but there's a sense that you bothered. You have bothered to write a message and put it in an envelope, take it to the post box in a way that, those awful email wishing you Merry Christmas with like an animated GIF. It's just... And
you usually have to click through, and sometimes you've got to log in, and there's a silly little often a silly little kind of animation or something that takes up quite a long time. Some of them are quite nice. And look, if you can't afford to send Christmas cards, what do you think should you do? Because there are a lot of people who might say, look, I'd love to send, you know, all these Christmas cards, but it's prohibitively expensive, and I want to send an e-card or something like that. I want to wish someone a happy Christmas. I mean, what do you think is the best way of doing that in the most cost-effective way and that is still meaningful?
Well, I think, you know, the most meaningful thing is a personal message. So, you know, the thing that makes the email so awful is that it feels like a blanket corporate email. But if it is a private email to that individual recipient with a photo, I know it's very American, but I think we're now in an age where, you know, we express ourselves through pictures. So a picture of whatever, some Christmas scene of you, your family, whatever, with a one-line personal message. It costs nothing, and you've made the effort and you've thought about them, and that is going to be a great deal cheaper than £1.65 stamp plus £2.50 Christmas card. Maybe £1 if you bought them in a job lot. You know, it starts to add up if you're sending 20, 30, or you were saying, you know, 100 Christmas.
And charities must be missing out as well, because a lot of, well, at least some of their income will come. I always try to buy charity. Sorry, I'm coming across like a Mother Teresa or something, but I always try to buy charity cards from a particular charity I support, the Royal Castle Lung Cancer Foundation, and I do try to buy them from them, but they must be missing out on this as well, Harry.
Absolutely. It was a really key source of income. I mean, some charities and some retailers were a bit naughty about how little of that was going on to the charity. But no, it was a worthwhile source of income. What was interesting, actually, John Lewis was talking about this, the whole kind of buying Christmas decorations early. They were selling a lot of individual Christmas baubles, and they reckon that people are buying them to give as gifts, as personalised, you know, I'm thinking about you. And of course, baubles now actually quite cheap. They're quite cute. And some of them are charities. A lot of the charity shops now do sell Christmas baubles. So that is one way of, you know, supporting your favourite charity, even if you don't want to buy a stack of.
He wrote it in.
Good afternoon, it's 1 o'clock on Saturday the 30th of November, and this is the weekend on GB News. I hope you're having a wonderful last day of November. It's December tomorrow and you're not ready, are you? I know you're not ready because I'm not either. The assisted dying bill, we have to talk about it, it's the most important story of the week, is backed by MPs. The Prime Minister was amongst those who supported the vote after an emotional debate, but those opposed to promised to redouble their efforts to persuade MPs to change their mind as they move on to months of detailed scrutiny of the bill. Then Penny Lancaster hits out at Greg Wallace, saying she is prepared to go to the appropriate authorities over his behaviour after the MasterChef host has stepped down following allegations of inappropriate sexual comments.
Well, it is the day of the Coral Gold Cup. Those jockeys at 3 o'clock all vying to win this trophy. We have got all of the atmosphere here at Newbury.
That was a big shiny one, wasn't it? And today marks 150 years since the birth of Winston Churchill. We'll be looking back at his life and what made him one of Britain's most famous figures. But do you think he was the greatest Briton ever, or a bit divisive now? I'm Dawn Neeson, and this is The Weekend. But this show is nothing without you and your views. And you can get in touch, just like Richard has just done, because it's nearly Christmas, come on. Richard has just said, most of my Christmas presents as a kid were things like socks, hankies, underpants and jumpers. And hallelujah to that as well. We were talking earlier on about how Christmas is so expensive these days. But it doesn't have to be. There's the clue. So let me know your thoughts on that. Is Christmas too expensive? Can you afford it? What are you doing? What have you got? How far have you got to go before you're ready? Let me know your thoughts on that and all the stories we're discussing today. Very simple to get involved at gbnews.com/your say and join in our conversation. Now, great panel this hour. Keeping me company is writer and broadcaster Matthew Torbett and political commentator Charlie Downs. Thank you very much for joining me, gentlemen. And we also have in the studio, looking incredibly festive and very beautiful as always, Tatiana Sanchez with your news headlines.
Looking very festive yourself, Dawn. Thank you very much and good afternoon. The top stories.
Assisted dying could become legal in England and Wales after the bill was backed by MPs in a historic vote.
The ayes to the right, 330. The noes to the left, 275. The ayes have it, and look!
Kim Leadbeater's bill received 330 ayes compared to 275 noes at its second reading in the House of Commons, a majority of 55. Sir Keir Starmer was among those who voted in favour of the bill. It would allow adults with just 6 months left to live to request medical assistance to end their lives. Ms Leadbeater says there is absolutely still a lot of work to do on assisted dying proposals, and slight changes to the bill are part of the process. Last night's result means the legislation will now progress to the committee stage for scrutiny, with the Lords also to be given opportunities to express their views on the measure before it potentially becomes law. President Volodymyr Zelensky has suggested the parts of Ukraine under his control should be taken under the NATO umbrella to try and stop the hot phase of the war. During an interview, the Ukrainian president was asked whether he would accept the NATO membership, but only on the territory that Kyiv currently holds. He said he would, but only if NATO membership was offered to the whole of Ukraine within its internationally recognised borders first. However, so far, President Putin has given no indication that he's abandoned his desire to subjugate Ukraine entirely. Meanwhile, last night, the Ukrainian foreign minister urged his NATO counterparts to issue an invitation to Kyiv at a meeting in Brussels this week to join the Western Military Alliance, according to a letter seen by Reuters. Further accusations have been made against TV presenter Greg Wallace in the wake of him stepping away from hosting the BBC show MasterChef while a review into complaints is carried out. Penny Lancaster's prepared to speak with authorities regarding her experience with Mr Wallace on Celebrity MasterChef following his recent departure. The Sun newspaper reports 3 different women are now also accusing Mr Wallace of groping. Production company Banijay UK says it's launching an external review, with Mr Wallace fully cooperating during the investigation. His lawyers insist the claims are entirely false. A memorial service is being held today for former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond. His wife of more than 40 years and supporters have been arranging a remembrance service for him today on St Andrew's Day. Mr Salmond died last month in North Macedonia at the age of 69. He had been at a conference when he suffered a heart attack and was buried in a private family ceremony near to his home in Aberdeenshire at the end of October. In other news, a plane which experienced a serious incident in October last year is said to have left nearly 200 people on board at risk of developing hypoxia, a potentially fatal condition. The aircraft had been en route to Kos in Greece after departing Manchester Airport when an oversight from both pilots led to 2 crucial engine systems not being turned on, resulting in a loss of pressure within the cabin. A report from the Air Accidents Investigation Branch says the loss of pressure could be significant enough to affect cognitive performance. 3 days later, the same aircraft veered off the runway at Leeds Bradford Airport. GB News has contacted TUI for comment. Today marks 150 years since the birth of Winston Churchill. Born in 1874, the wartime Prime Minister led the country during the darkest hour of Dunkirk and the Blitz onto victory against Nazi Germany in 1945. He served as UK Prime Minister from 1940 to 1945 and 51 to 55. Churchill led Britain to victory in World War II over Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany. On the 4th of June 1940, shortly after taking over from Neville Chamberlain following the failure of the government's appeasement policy, he delivered to the House of Commons what became his best-known speech. And today, commemorative Winston Churchill stamps are being issued by the Post Office, and they will go on general sale. And finally, more than 100 dogs dressed in Christmas jumpers joined a festive parade in central London in support of rescue charities. An estimated 130 pets made their way from St James's Park down the Mall towards Buckingham Palace with their owners this morning. The event was organised by Rescue Dogs of London and Friends to raise funds for Hungry Hearts Dog Rescue and ZEM Rescues, which rehome dogs from overseas. Prizes for the best dressed pets were awarded in Green Park next to the palace, and those vying for the title included 4-legged Santas, puppy elves and a French bulldog dressed in a festively fashionable red beret. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More news from me in half an hour.
Thank you very much. Wasn't that lovely, those dogs? That was so sweet. You know someone's going to go, oh, that's cruel. No, you can't be doing that. No, that's cruel. You just know someone's going to be doing that, don't you? OK, let's get straight into today's stories. Now, assisted dying. Before I go into the spiel on assisted dying, I just want to read this out because this one has hit home with me. This is a message from Jamand, 15. Hello. Jamand, you say, my 85-year-old mum was in a panic this morning. She said, you haven't signed me up for that, have you? On her telly, they were talking about assisted dying. I reassured her that she is safe and not to worry. I'm wondering, though, how many others are fretting about this potential bill. Now, that hit home, because yesterday I had the huge pleasure of interviewing Dame Tanni Grey-Thompson, the Paralympian, on this. And she, a woman with her influence and her fame and her wealth and her sheer inspirational, well, just the fact she is a sheer inspiration, she was saying she would be worried about going into hospital now. She would feel more vulnerable because of this bill. And that, I think, is quite chilling. In any case, it is a step closer. It's going to be becoming legal in England and Wales after MPs did indeed back that bill in a historic vote. The vote followed 4.5 hours of debate with 330 MPs voting in favour and 275 opposing it. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, was one of the key people voting in favour alongside the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. The legislation means that terminally ill adults with 6 months to live are able to request assistance in ending their life. OK. Well, let's see what the panel make of this one. Writer and broadcaster Matthew Torbet and political commentator Charlie Downs. Matthew, I'm going to come to you first on this one. I'm trying, because it's a Saturday, I am trying to keep this as light as I possibly can, but we have to talk about this subject because it is on the front page of all your newspapers, and we are talking about it, and I've just read that out. A lot of elderly and vulnerable people are worried about this. What do you make of where we are?
Yeah, it's a big story. I mean, we've had a lot of them the last few years, particularly post-Brexit, but it was a real historic day yesterday in the way that our society is going to look like in the future, potentially, as long as this obviously isn't the end of the road. The bill will go into committee stage and it's still got to go through the Lords and then essentially a third reading with MPs again. I think what Baroness Grey-Thompson said, I think probably rings true with lots of people. I think Gordon Brown spoke about it in the week about how the right to die could become the obligation to die. And I think that was one of, I don't know how I feel about it necessarily. I don't envy MPs yesterday because I totally understand the argument of suffering. I spoke to my parents yesterday who, you know, traditionally don't vote, aren't necessarily politically engaged. And my mum said, well, I'd rather have the option as opposed to your nan, who was suffering. My nan, you know, struggled with cancer for many years. And my dad said, definitely. So there's obviously some level of appetite anecdotally for this. But I'd hate the idea of people feeling a sense of burden just by staying alive and feeling like, oh, well, maybe I'm hanging around the neck of my relatives. And the other concern I had is I think with this sort of thing, once the genie's out the bottle, you can't put it back in.
Yeah.
So my worry is that the scope of who may be able to access the right to die as such will only broaden, and I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or not. But if you want the correct safeguards in place, voting it through into committee is probably maybe the right thing to do, because ultimately that's where you go through line by line the legislation.
It does feel like it's a bit rushed. I mean, the private members' bill put up 3 weeks ago. They had 5 hours to debate it in the House yesterday. Everyone wanted to say on it, understandably so, but in 5 hours all you can say is, well, yes or no, and there were some pretty horrific stories in there. So what do you make of it, Charlie?
Well, just to go on from Matthew's point there, I think we have to remember that, you know, the NHS is basically the national religion of Britain at this point. And so much is done in the name of saving and funding the NHS. And so this bill passing and this idea of assisted suicide, I think, is going to take on a character, inevitably, where, as you say, there is a sense of obligation that in order to preserve the NHS, in order to not be a burden, people are going to opt for this choice. Now, if we look at Canada, which is a country that has had what they call MAID, medical assistance in dying, for I think a couple of years at this point, it's at the point now where 5% of deaths annually in Canada come as a result of MAID. That's 1 in 20. 1 in 20 deaths happen in a medically assisted way. Now, I think that's personally very dark. I think that the so-called safeguards on this bill are not strong enough. I think the idea that we can know for a fact if somebody only has 6 months to live is not accurate, because we hear all the time of people who are given that kind of diagnosis but then go on to live for multiple years afterwards. So I think we're playing with forces here that human beings shouldn't really be meddling in. And this is something I don't see a lot of people talking about, is because these things are always spoken about, being in the political paradigm that we are, in quantitative terms. But we never hear about things like the sanctity of life, quite frankly. These are alien ideas in our political paradigm, but they need to be addressed. Because
it was quite interesting, the divide, because politicians were allowed to vote on their personal choice rather than down a political line. And it was interesting that politicians, MPs representing areas areas that had a strong faith group in them would vote against it. That was quite interesting. The one thing I was curious about, though, Matthew, on this is in 2015, the last time MPs voted on this, it was 330 who voted against it compared to 118 who supported it. So it's quite a big change, and it's only 9 years. What's changed so much that suddenly it's 330 for it, 275 against it?
I think partly society has shifted somewhat. The more people I've spoke to since that last vote seem to have come round to the idea that there should be something. They maybe couldn't articulate what that is, but you know, maybe something should be done on this. I think also the demography of Parliament, we have a much younger Parliament now, especially after a lot of the new Labour MPs who are much younger coming in, who maybe see this slightly differently than people of an older generation. I just feel very conflicted, and actually I'd be interested to see what Charlie thought, because I totally get a lot of the arguments, especially some of the ones you've put forward, and yet I still find myself, despite erring on the air of caution, going, I think I probably would want the choice if I was in such a position. And I wondered if you would, despite, I assume, some level of opposition from what I could tell.
Well, I mean, this does go into a kind of deeper conversation about the kind of political and moral paradigm that we live in the 21st century, where basically choice is held up as the ultimate moral good. The ultimate right of people is choice. Now, I'm not a liberal, so I don't think that choice is the most important thing. I think that there are things in life, and indeed in death, that aren't the business of humans to be meddling in. So I kind of, you know, you talk about erring on the side of caution. I err on the side of caution where I say, well, look, there are situations, I mean, you know, I know for sure that I've had situations where family have suffered with disease and with, you know, end-of-life kind of things going on. But do I think that it's our place as humans to just end their life? There's something about that that's extremely dark to me. And the other side of this as well is where this goes and what this does to the way we approach death and approach these sorts of things, where it does become, in a weird way, kind of transactionalized. Because the other thing as well that I think about this is, inevitably, living under the economic system that we do, this is going to become an industry, right? The assisted suicide industry is going to spring up. There's already companies that manufacture these pods that you go into, and you press a button that says, I consent to die. And there's something about that is just, it's almost like a satirical thing you would have seen in the 80s in some kind of sketch. It's so macabre.
It can almost seem quite dystopian.
Very much so.
But you didn't answer me. So would you, and I know it doesn't work like this, I imagine, and none of us know because we're alive, but the idea of suffering so much, I think I'd be a coward and want to opt out.
Well, this is the other thing, is we live in a time where suffering is viewed as the ultimate moral evil. We can't have any kind of suffering, when actually suffering's part of life. It's actually an essential part of life. And I think, you know, as I don't know, unfeeling as this may sound, as harsh as this may sound, the suffering that we go through, especially at the end of life, that's part of the deal. That's part of life.
Very interesting point. I'm going to have to interrupt you on there because we have run out of time on that one. But what do you think about what Charlie's just said? Suffering is part of our lives. And we are all living longer now as well. I mean, I work regularly with the wonderful Christopher Biggins, who's in Panto, by the way. And he has, I think he's semi-joking, he has this theory that because we're all living longer, there should be a cut-off point. Now, Biggins did joke that it should be 60, and given that I'm a week away from that birthday, I'm suggesting that that's not a good idea. Okay, so I think we have to, so in any case, Biggins, if you're watching, good luck in Panto, mate, but 60, just make it a bit longer. OK, but it is a big sporting weekend as well. The Coral Winter Festival is taking place at Newbury Racecourse today. The festival is set to feature one of the country's most prestigious jump races in the racing calendar, the Coral Gold Cup. Now, we have got Jack Carson down there, and he is doing something interesting with a horse. Is he ready? Is he ready to put that horse down? And he's ready. Jack Carson, bring us up to date on how much fun you're having down there.
Well, it is so much fun, and actually it's amazing to see here, you know, just the atmosphere. It's probably looking a little bit quiet around us at the moment. That's because the 115's not well, I think it's actually in process at the moment. So there's a few people that have gone over to the grandstands, but I mean, there's thousands of people here spanning all kinds of generations. I mean, earlier on we spoke to Paul Nicholls, of course, you know, one of the biggest names in horse racing, and hopefully we can hear from him now.
Looking forward to it. Touch with the horses are in good form. We had 2 good winners here yesterday. Today's another day. Got some lovely horses to run, and weather's good. We're looking forward to it. I know their prep's gone good, otherwise they obviously wouldn't be running. That probably applies to everybody. I mean, ours have had everything go right for them. We've had a dry overnight, so the ground's not too bad, which suits all of ours, funny enough. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, of course, Paul Nicholls feeling confident there, but let's dissect a bit of that confidence with Philip Davies, of course, friends of the channel, who's been with us all day today. I mean, listening to him feeling confident there, I mean, you know, we've had a few races so far. He's getting on okay.
Yeah, Paul's always bullish about his horses. I mean, he always thinks that anything he runs is going to win, and if he wasn't going to win, he wouldn't be running it. So Paul's always bullish. It's probably why he's so successful. But I thought it was interesting with Paul that he trains a lot of horses for Sir Alex Ferguson. I mean, he had 2 winners here yesterday, Alex Ferguson. Harry Redknapp had a winner yesterday here as well. It was like a football takeover at Newbury. And actually, both of them have got superstars. Regent Stroll, which won the first race at Newbury yesterday, owned by Alex Ferguson, is a really expensive horse, has won 3 out of 3, could be anything. The Jukebox Man, owned by Harry Redknapp, is well fancied for a race at Cheltenham next March already. So the football world is taking over the horse racing world, and they can always be seen at Newbury races.
I got for Paul, the 3 o'clock, that what we're all really here for, the Gold Cup. Can Do Kid is his runner. I mean, obviously he's going to be confident. You know, in terms of this course, he's probably got the best record as a trainer. So, what do you maybe think he can do there with the 3 o'clock, the Gold Cup?
Yeah, Can Do Kid has got a great chance. It's a really competitive race. It's very difficult to rule any of them out. It's one of the most competitive Coral Gold Cups probably of all time. But look, Paul Nicholls has won the race 3 times, twice with Denman, who was a superstar who won the Cheltenham Gold Cup. So he knows what it takes to win this race.
I'm just going to remind us really about the importance of this, you know, within the racing calendar. One lady we were speaking to earlier was saying this for her is like the start of Christmas, but another gentleman said some of the runners and riders today, he looks and how to track them throughout the season as well as we head into next year.
Yeah, people run their horses at this meeting because they're good, and so you can usually take it as read that if a top trainer is running one of their horses here, it's because he really rates it very highly. So it's not a bad strategy to follow horses that ran at this meeting, ran at the Hennessy Gold Cup, because the trainers are running them because they think they're very good.
Right, Philip, thank you so much for joining us once again. Today's horse racing expert with us today here at Newbury, but the atmosphere is fantastic, Dawn.
Brilliant, it looks it. I'm glad you're having a good time. Thank you very much, Jack. Yeah. All part of Christmas, isn't it, the horse races? My dad used to love the GGs. And talking of Christmas is past, I just want to read this lovely message out. It's from Babs. Hi, Babs. Thanks for watching today. Babs says, I remember my own Christmases when I had a real ladies' stocking which stretched and had nuts and tangerines, small toys and sweets and a colouring book stuffed in it with always a bit of money in the toe. We loved it. Our parents were poor and we didn't have much for Christmas, but I remember them so much. And the greatest gift that you can have if you have a wonderful family and they give you great Christmases, even if you're poor, they stay with you forever, don't they? In any case, I'm Dawn Neeson, this is GB News, and there's loads more coming up on today's show. Today marks 150 years since the birth of Winston Churchill. Wow. Do you think he was our greatest Briton, though, or a bit controversial? All of that and much more to come. This is GB News, Britain's news channel. We'll see you soon.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
A Tesco store on a Scottish island has defied locals by ignoring pleas to stay closed on Sundays.
Tesco's has said that no member of staff in Stornoway would be forced to work on a Sunday and that it had received a significant amount of positive reaction to its plans.
Well, let's talk now to the Minister of the Reformed Presbyterian Church, Reverend Kenneth Stewart. Good morning to you, Reverend Stewart. You're trying to keep Sunday special, and if Tesco are going to open up, that means it won't be quite as special for you.
Well, yes, good morning, and thanks for having me on. Yes, Tesco, for some reason, they claim it's not economic advantage, but for some reason they've decided to go against hundreds of years of tradition on this island and the deeply held religious convictions of many, many people, including, of course, their own customers who are really grieved by this decision. We come obviously from the standpoint that a day of rest is effectively mandatory. It's a human right, along with the other 10 commandments which have undergirded our moral and legal fabric in society. It actually enshrines the human right to a day of rest. And of course, in the UK, that's been eroded for many, many years. Incidentally, it's still far more respected on the continent. But for us here, the Sabbath or the day of rest has been very, very important. It's not just what we do, it's who we are. And for some reason, Tesco have decided just to go against that.
And Reverend Stewart, we were actually talking about this earlier, how in European countries, I mean, even in France, which is a secular country, still very few shops will open on a Sunday.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking... This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Oh, there you are. Welcome back. Hope you've got a nice cup of tea, maybe a beer. It's a Saturday. We're nearly in December. Or maybe a nice snowball. Do you remember them back in the day? Eggnog. Ugh. We had some on the show last week. I'm Dawn Neeson, and this is The Weekend. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, today, as well as being the last day of November, also marks a special occasion that would have been Sir Winston Churchill's 150th birthday. Born in 1874, the wartime Prime Minister led the country through some of our darkest hours. Our reporter Will Hollis has been looking back at the life of the man often called the Great Britain, or if you're younger, a divisive racist. Take it away.
We shall not flinch from the supreme trial. Lift up your hearts. All will come right.
During Britain's darkest days, Winston Churchill lit the way forward. On the 30th of November 1874, Churchill was born into the aristocracy at Blenheim Palace, destined for greatness. Poor grades at school and a troubled family life at home tainted his early years, but a fascination with the military saw him join the Royal Cavalry, travelling the world as a soldier and journalist. Yet it is for his years as an MP and later cigar-smoking Prime Minister that Sir Winston Churchill is most famously recognised. A master in weaponising words, his speeches are amongst the most memorable in the English language.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister. We will mete out to the Germans the measure, and more than the measure. They have meted out to us.
During the Second World War, Churchill spent countless hours underground in secret headquarters, plotting the route to victory alongside his war cabinet and Britain's allies. Kate Clements is the curator at Churchill War Rooms, a part of the Imperial War Museums.
Here we are in the map room in the Churchill War Rooms, and what we have here is the book in which the maps that were being signed out were recorded. And there's someone in here several times, so when it says PM, that stands for Prime Minister. So that's Churchill signing out maps to look at in April and May 1942. Churchill is a pivotal figure in history, certainly British history and 20th century history. He has become sort of legendary, but underneath all that, there was, of course, a very real man who we know a great deal about.
Hostilities will end officially at 1 minute after midnight tonight.
Victorious in 1945 and credited as the saviour of Britain, Churchill's extraordinary life ended aged 90.
150 years since his birth and decades on from his death, Winston Churchill remains a towering figure at home and abroad.
I think Churchill is the greatest Briton, at least of the modern era.
I learned all about him in school. He shaped the modern world and all of Europe as we know it.
If it wasn't for him, we might all be speaking German.
Living memories of Churchill remain, for now, soon to be replaced by only history's accounts.
The soldiers of the Allied armies pay tribute to Britain's man of destiny, whose courage and steadfastness in the dark years will be remembered in the hour of victory.
A war leader triumphant and loved by his nation. Will Hollis, GB News.
Stirring stuff there from Will Hollis. OK, let's see what my panel make of this. We still have Matthew and Charlie with us. Now, depending on the age group of the people you ask, Churchill is either the greatest living Brit ever or a divisive racist. Just saying what people are saying. So who wants to go first on this one? I've got two very young men, Matthew and Charlie, with me. Charlie, you're looking at me with that look that I'm going to say something very dramatic. Take it away.
Well, I mean, I am a young person, but I don't criticise Churchill for being a racist or a colonialist or all those sorts of things. I mean, he was just a man of his time in that regard. What I would say is that Churchill has become mythologised in the modern mind as being this absolutely faultless, great man of history, heroic figure. And I think that actually that attitude, it prevents us from thinking seriously about the situation that we find ourselves in as a nation, because whilst Churchill was an impressive leader, he also failed in his own mission, which was to preserve the British Empire. He said this himself, that the World War II and the events that came after led to the collapse of the British Empire, and he felt that he had failed in that regard. And I think that that's not unfair, because the Second World War was disastrous. It was an absolute catastrophe for our nation and for the rest of Europe. And Churchill's uncompromising attitude, where he had to have this unconditional German surrender or death or destruction, that I think was incredibly damaging. And I mean, I'm no wartime prime minister or anything, but you have to look at that and you have to wonder, could things have been different? Could there have been a more peaceful resolution to the events of the middle of the century? And you look at where we are as a nation now, where we are governed by idiots, and where we are being, where mass immigration is tearing our society apart, social fabric is disappearing, young people can't afford houses and don't start families, jobs are soul-crushing and depressing, and the entire place. Well, no, that's quite true. But a lot of young people feel that way, and we have to wonder, okay, well, how much of that is down to Churchill's legacy? How much of that is downstream from the liberal world order that he helped to bring into existence?
Blimey, you've thought about this a lot, haven't you? Matthew, what do you make of what he's just said, mostly?
That was very light-hearted Saturday afternoon.
I was going to say,
contribution, really, wasn't
Keeping it light as always.
More, to be honest with you.
No, I think Churchill is probably one of the most studied British Prime Ministers has ever been, for obvious reasons, of being involved in World War II. I think, like lots of figures, people currently in this climate wish to paint people as either good or evil, and ordinarily you're somewhere in between. And he's a very complex figure. I think he obviously had a strategic vision during the war and played a huge part in the fact that we overcame Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich. I think one of the things that's always overlooked about Churchill, which people don't always see, is his cultural contributions, in fairness. He was a Nobel Prize-winning author and historian. Art is the beauty is in the eye of the beholder or whatever, but, he obviously had a talent for that sort of thing and was a very effective orator, especially what you needed probably during that wartime era. However, you speak to people around the world, they may feel slightly different. because of his contributions to things like the Bengal famine and the millions of people that died. And then his comments, obviously, after the famine, and sort of playing it down and sort of saying it was nothing to do with him. I think also in Wales, you won't find a lot of love for him because he sent in the troops, which I think is maybe the only time that's happened in post-19th century, sent in the troops to break up strikes during the Tony Pandy miners' strike. So I think I think there's an argument to call him the greatest Briton and the reason why lots of us are maybe here today. But I think also it maybe needs to be viewed in context as a very complex character, I will put it diplomatically.
We had a Prime Minister since that is as good. We've only got 30 seconds, so...
Well, I'd say probably Rishi Sunak. I think he was pretty awesome, wouldn't you? That's a joke, by the way. I think it was terrible. No, I don't think we've had a good leader since the end of the Second World War. I think every single leader, and I'm including other figures who have been lionised and mythologized like Thatcher and others, and Johnson even, they have all contributed to the situation that we're in now as a nation, which is basically falling apart.
OK.
I think...
Anyone you'd like to nominate? Liz Truss?
Harold Wilson managed to nationalise shipbuilding with a majority of 1. That was quite, effective. Tony Blair and Margaret Thatcher won 3 elections each. That's pretty impressive. Churchill managed to lose his majority after the war. So, I don't know. It's all opinions. I don't rate many of our politicians.
Well, what do you think? gbnews.com/your say. Who have you just said? Oh, sorry, I've lost your name. You'd be curious to see what Trudy, I think. You'd be curious to see what Churchill would do with the small boats problem. Yeah, me too. Right now, at GB News, we'd love to hear what you think. Every day we'll be running our poll of the day. Today we're asking, is Sir Winston Churchill our greatest Briton? We've heard what my panel think. We'll be bringing you the live results throughout the day, so make sure you stay tuned. The final result will be announced later in Nana, a Queer Show, straight after this one. For all our latest polls, news and how to vote, just go to gbnews.com/poll. Now, I'm Dawn Neeson. I still am Dawn Neeson. This is GB News. It's still GB News, and there's still loads more coming up on today's show. But it is still Tatiana. Yes, she's still gorgeous. Yes, she's still in festive red. And she's reading your news headlines for you.
I don't deserve all that kindness, Dawn. Thank you very much. Well, the top stories this afternoon. Assisted dying could become legal in England and Wales after the bill was backed by MPs in an historic vote.
The ayes to the right, 330. The noes to the left, 275. The ayes have it, and look!
Kim Leadbeater's bill received 330 ayes compared to 275 noes at its second reading in the House of Commons, a majority of 55. Sir Keir Starmer was among those who voted in favour of the bill. It would allow adults with just 6 months left to live to request medical assistance to end their lives. Kim Leadbeater says there's absolutely still a lot of work to do on assisted dying proposals, and slight changes, she said, to the bill are part of the process. Last night's result means the legislation will now progress to the committee stage for scrutiny, with the Lords also to be given opportunities to express their views on the measure before it potentially becomes law. A memorial service has been held today for former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond. His wife of more than 40 years and supporters arranged a remembrance service for him on St Andrew's Day. Mr Salmond died last month in North Macedonia at the age of 69. He'd been at a conference when he suffered a heart attack. He was buried in a private family ceremony near his home in Aberdeenshire at the end of October. And President Volodymyr Zelensky has suggested the parts of Ukraine under his control should be taken under the NATO umbrella to try and stop the hot phase of the war. During an interview, the Ukrainian president was asked whether he would accept NATO membership, but only on the territory that Kyiv currently holds. He said he would, but only if NATO membership was offered to the whole of Ukraine within its internationally recognised borders first. However, so far, President Putin has given no indication that he's abandoned his desire to subjugate Ukraine entirely. Meanwhile, last night, the Ukrainian foreign minister urged his NATO counterparts to issue an invitation to Kyiv at a meeting in Brussels this week to join the Western Military Alliance. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More from me in half an hour.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Now, OK, we are moving on. Thank you. Right, remember, you can tell I got confused there because I was distracted by your messages, which is what this show's all about, gbnews.com/your say. Some interesting comments about you, Charlie, today, which is unusual. Sailing close to the wind, according to some people on here.
Is that right?
Though we like sailing close to the wind. Now, let me know your thoughts on all the stories, including Charlie today. Very simple, by visiting gbnews.com/your say and join the conversation. And there is loads more coming up on today's show. Yes, we are talking rubbish. Insert your own joke there. Households will be given a minimum of 4 bins in new council guidance intending to boost recycling rates, but councils can add more containers if they deem it best for local needs. How many bins do you have, and what colour are they, and how do you cope with them? All of that and much more to come. Dawn Neeson, talking rubbish, GB News. See you soon.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Through the course of the weekend, we hold on to rather cloudy skies across the UK, bits and pieces of rain around, but very mild for the time of year. At the moment, low pressure sitting towards the northwest of the UK, fairly tightly packed isobars, indicating quite blustery winds at times, but at the moment, weather fronts generally being held at bay out towards the west of the UK. So looking at things in more detail for this afternoon, on the whole, quite a lot of cloud around, bits and pieces of patchy rain towards the north and west. The best of the breaks, I think, reserved for areas to the east and north of high ground, so north-east Wales, east-north-east England, and the far north-east of Scotland, fairly well in terms of sunshine. And wherever you are, it's a mild picture, despite the fairly brisk southerly winds, temperatures up to 14, 15, perhaps even locally 16 Celsius, that's 61 in Fahrenheit. As we go into the evening then, we hold on to rather cloudy skies across much of Scotland, bits and pieces of patchy rain around. Still some clear weather up towards the far northeast and out towards the far west of the country, but on the whole, a fairly damp picture with some hill fog in places. Outbreaks of more persistent, locally heavy rain moving into the west of Northern Ireland, so that it's the east seeing the best of the clear spells at this stage. Some clear spells out across Wales and the southwest, the odd shower, and fairly cloudy skies towards the east and southeast of England. Into the evening and overnight, we hold on to rather cloudy but mostly dry weather towards the southeast. Elsewhere, though, notice things go downhill. We'll see outbreaks of rain moving in from the south and west, some of that rain turning quite heavy in places. Out towards the far west and northwest, by the end of the night, we'll see some clear weather and turning very blustery with gales up towards the northwest of the UK. A very mild picture, though, temperatures generally holding in double figures, so a frost-free night to come across the UK. As for Sunday, well, once again, a pretty unsettled picture. Bands of rain moving from west to east across the UK, interspersed by some sunshine at times. Those very blustery winds towards the north slowly easing down. And once again, for the time of year, it's pretty mild. Temperatures into the low to mid-teens Celsius. Once again, we could see a high of 14, even 15 Celsius down towards the south. 15 is 59 in Fahrenheit. That's pretty much it from me. See you soon.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back to The Weekend with me, Dawn Neeson. I have just been accused of trying to shoehorn a link to Christmas in every single story I'm covering. So we are now talking bins and recycling. Recycling your Christmas wrapping paper and those cards. You know, the cards no one's sending now because everyone's sending really boring emails and WhatsApp messages. But the question of the day, how many bins do you have? Households will be given a minimum of 4 bins in new council guidance intended to boost recycling rates, but councils can add more containers if they deem it best for local needs. The changes are part of plans to simplify recycling across councils in an effort to increase flatlining recycling rates from around 45% to 65% by 2035. Let's see what my panel make of this. Matthew and Charlie. We were talking about films actually before this, but we're going to talk rubbish now. Charlie, you have been accused of talking rubbish so far. We're on your Churchill opinions. I'm going to come to you first on this one. Now, confession. I live in a block of flats, right? And we've got one big dump bin downstairs where all the recycling goes in one big dump bin. Glass, paper, recyclable plastic, everything you want goes in one bin, right? All together. And then the houses a little bit further down the road, they've got 6 bins outside. The same lorry comes and collects it all. It's mad, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we're really setting the world to rights today, aren't we? Assisted dying, the legacy of Churchill, and now bins. Yeah. Well, do you know what? It's funny. This is one of those stories. It's one of those issues that's like, it really ignites passions in like local politics. It's always potholes and bins, isn't it? People, you know, that's because
know what? I said the same. Potholes and bins.
But these are things that do actually matter. Like, it's easy to be flippant about this sort of thing, but this is people's day-to-day lives, right? And it does actually affect people. I mean, especially like you said, when we have all the wrapping paper and stuff over Christmas, people need room to recycle them. Yeah, no worries. Hey, I'm just you know, trying to keep it light here. But to be honest, I mean, look, I don't have a hugely strong opinion on this subject. I'm not going to lie to you. It's not something I think about all the time. Is the number of bins that we should have. But I mean, I guess recycling is quite desirable.
How many bins do you have?
Well, at home we have, we've got the garden waste, we've got the recycling, general waste and food. So 4 in total. Yeah, but to be fair, we do quite often fill them up.
Are you with your family?
I am, yes.
So
exposed.
It's your family are, grown-ups in your family. Not that I'm saying you're not grown up, obviously, but...
You wound me.
You're probably your mum and dad. Guessing?
Yeah.
Exposing me. Opinion on bins. Sorry, I've stung him already.
Yeah, no, but I mean, we find that we often fill them up before rubbish day. So, hey, maybe having more is a good idea.
Well, yes. Well, I mean, this is, in theory, cutting down, because some people out there, 10...
What are they recycling?
Bins must loom big in your life.
I hate this stuff. I know I must be better at this sort of stuff, and you're supposed to care about the climate. As soon as I hear anything about it, I think, oh no, I don't care. I don't care. What do you mean there's 7 bins? What do you mean there's 4? What are we putting in them? It's never clear. And I just think it ignites passions, one, because of nosy neighbours, in my opinion. So, unlike you, we only have 2. I'm in a block of flats. And we have the general bin, which is for everything. But there is, and it's turned up the last couple of years, like a cardboard sort of big bin as well. I think other than that, I just think, well, I'd like to do more, but I'm not even given the option, so you just throw it in.
And then the same lorry comes and collects it all, goes to the little house down the road, which is hidden by a wall of bins.
Yes, exactly.
They've got colours.
Well, the thing is as well, I think our recycling rate, for those that are really interested, is about 50% now, which is, it seems okay, probably should be better. And I know years ago, I lost any faith because we used to just ship it all off to China and they'd route through it all anyway because it was more economically, I suppose, viable for us. I think if you're going to want to incentivise this sort of stuff and you want to tackle things like climate change or waste or whatever else, I think you've got to start offering up real financial incentives and people will do it more. If you're going to sort of offer money off council tax as a local recycling champion and you're going to actually make sure people are doing this sort of stuff, what I don't like, which is what happened when I lived back in Manchester, is you'd get financial penalties for putting stuff in the wrong bin because if somebody's had to sort through it as if it's not their job anyway. So I apologise to anyone watching at home who's liberal or whatever else. I hate it. I wish we'd all, do something better with it. And yeah, that's my strong feeling for the days on the bins.
I feel like you should be suspicious if someone's got like 10 bins out the front of their house. It's like, what?
You've got too much time.
What are you doing?
We all live busy lives.
This is Steve Reed, the Environment Secretary, just in case you're wondering who he is. And he's suggesting this. To make it 4 bins is really going to be the guidance. But, councils can give you 10 if they want to.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, there is something of interest that we could note on this story, which is the fact that we do produce so much waste as a society. Now, I am quite sceptical of the narratives around things like climate change. I think that quite often that's politically motivated stuff. But that's not to say that we shouldn't care about the environment. I think that we are custodians of this world, and it's our business, it's our duty to preserve the natural world. And, the kind of economy we live in, where it's all about just constant roiling consumption. It's the next and best, greatest model all the time. The amount of waste that we produce through that attitude, I think, is not great because we see the litter in our towns and in the countryside as well. So perhaps recycling and that sort of thing is something we should be incentivising more of.
Yeah. So we should get back to Christmas then. So you're going to recycle your Christmas wrapping paper, are you? Where does that go?
I don't know if the paper can go in the card one. I'm not sure.
If it's got foil silver stuff on it, then.
I don't know. That's to say I've been a good boy and actually getting presents this year. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
Oh, yes, Matthew. Yes, because, see, as soon as I start talking about Christmas, the voice in my head, who's called Lewis, goes, OK, let's move on, shall we? It's like, no. Any case, a very happy birthday.
Are your decorations up yet?
Yeah.
I knew they would.
I know, they were at the end of November. The husband, I tell the story that the husband actually hates it. I put a little star up in his man cave, right? A little tiny one on the windowsill, right, next to his guitars, and which he wants another one for Christmas. He's not getting. So it was on the windowsill. And you know what? The day after I put it up, I went in there. Guess what?
Took it down?
To be fair, you shouldn't be entering his mail space like that.
When do you take them down, though? Do you leave them up into the new year?
I'm quite good on 12th night, no. But
Oh, OK,
I do have a Halloween tree. I love the way you say Mal space.
Yeah.
It makes it sound quite kinky.
This is daytime television,
On
Dawn,
that
my
note,
goodness.
Is it really? On that note, I'm going to say a huge thank you to my wonderful panel, writer and broadcaster Matthew Talbot and political commentator Charlie Down. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Mouse space, indeed. Take that one with me. OK, I'm Dawn Neeson. This is GB News, and there's loads more coming up on today's show. We'll have all your latest showbiz with the gorgeous Stephanie Tetchy. And, yeah, she's got a lot to talk about, including The Jungle last night. Did you watch it? I did. gbnews.com/your say. This is Britain's news channel. Don't go too far. We'll see you very soon with the lovely Steffi.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Following the summer riots and the resurgence of far-right ideologies, the former Education Secretary told peers that reinforcing shared values is now more crucial than ever.
So we're asking this morning, should we teach British values or would it be a step backward?
Or how do you even start? To debate this now, we're joined by the Campaign for Real Education Chairman, Chris McGovern, and political commentator, Matthew Stadland.
Well, I think these days, particularly in schools, it's quite fashionable to look at the negative sides of Britain's identity, particularly British history. Personally, I think I'm very proud of being British, and I think we need to be proud of our country like most other countries around the world are.
As Chris says, Matthew, lots of other countries do it. Heck, you only have to look at the United States, don't you, to see how sort of patriotic they are. Is there anything wrong in trying to instil a bit of that amongst our youth?
I'm just worried it sounds a little bit communist, Stephen, being told what it is to be British. I've got my own personal but very vague views of what British values might be: inclusivity, patience, being able to queue, decency, respect for democracy and the rule of law. But I mean, very many people will have different sets of values. Some people are racist. So are British values racist? You talked about the far right. I think we all know what the far right is. It's sort of violent, xenophobic racism. But if you have, say, I don't know, 3-4 million people in this country who might describe themselves as racist or far right, and they're British, or as British as you lot and as I am, does that mean those values get taught in schools? My worry is it's a little bit communist.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, welcome back. Right, OK, it's showbiz time. That's all I'm going to say. I don't need to say any more. It's showbiz time, which means I have got the glorious Stephanie Tetchy in the studio with me. Steph, jungle.
Oh, jungle fever. We've had the first campmate out, and it was Jane Moore. I'm sorry. I think I could have placed bets on that, Dawn, because you know, so far in this season, there's been no fights. Everyone's got on pretty well. But I have to admit, I know Jane's a journalist and I respect her deeply, but she was a bit of a complainer in the jungle. You know, she was complaining of ageism, sexism against Barry and Danny Jones because they asked her to do the washing task because they are camp leaders. Yeah. And for the whole week, she was like, oh, they only picked me because I'm an older woman. I asked not to do that. I wanted to do harder tasks. So for the whole week, viewers have just seen her moaning. And the thing is, yesterday in her post-exit interview, she was like, you know, she was upset. She was the first one. She was like, you know, people don't appreciate hard workers. But that is not the brief of I'm a Celebrity.
No.
I'm a Celebrity. We want the people who are entertaining, are a joy to watch. And the moan is eventually, it's like, yeah, maybe one episode is fine, but to do it for the rest of the week, it's a bit too much.
Well, that's what the very first thing she said, I mean, I love Jane to bits. I've known Jane. Obviously, she's a fellow tabloid columnist. You know, we've worked on tabloids together. We worked on The Sun together. So full disclosure, I think she's wonderful. I really wanted her to win. But I knew that tabloid journalists never win things. Really, we never win things.
They don't.
I knew she was not going to do it. But the first thing she did when she came out was like, oh, just goes to show that hard work doesn't pay. And I'm thinking, no, Jane, just say something nice about everybody.
That's it. And, you know, she said, you know, most people say it's the time of their lives. And she said she was basically saying it was okay. She said she got a lot out of other people, but I think a lot of people didn't get much out of her just to, you know, light up her screens as she does on Loose Women. So now we are getting to near I'm a Celebrity. So there are going to be people who are going to be evicted one after the other.
Yeah, this is where it gets exciting, isn't it? But Jane says she wanted the less flashy ones, Colleen Rooney and
Melvin Adoon. Yeah, because I think she's very much, she wants the people who are working hard on camp to win, such as Colleen and Melvin. But I think she was making a slide dig at Dean, who has been quite entertaining, crying, shouting, doing the full works, but he's not actually a hard worker. So I think in that sense, I understand what she's saying, but people are always going to gravitate to the people like Colleen and Dean, who are just interesting to watch.
But they scream a lot. No one's that scared of anything ever.
I know. And
really?
I'm like, don't sign up for I'm a Celebrity, because that's what it's about. But this is last week. The public were just voting for Dean non-stop.
Yeah,
so
he screams a lot. Just very quickly, one thing that's fascinating me, Steph, all the girls with his eyelashes, and they're making clean. I mean, how does she look so gorgeous still?
No, I think she actually looks naturally beautiful, and that's what I love about the I'm a Celeb. Like Maura Higgins, Love Island side, usually caked and makeup to the max, but actually when you see them stripped off, you're like, you look really beautiful, natural.
Okay, well, Steph always looks beautiful naturally as well.
Don't know about
that. Some of us might be struggling. So, in any case, let's have a look at the weather with Marco for you. Thank you very much, Steph. Thank you.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Over the next few days, we'll see some rain at times, often quite blustery, and things will turn colder, albeit for a time, during the early part of the coming week. Low pressure's anchored towards the northwest of the UK at the moment, fairly tightly packed isobars, indicating those fairly blustery winds, and this weather front starting to move in from the far west there across Ireland and Northern Ireland. And we'll see outbreaks of rain here during the evening, some of that rain quite heavy, working from west to east. Towards the southeast, we hold on to mostly fine weather overnight, quite a bit of cloud around, but elsewhere it will go downhill. Outbreaks of rain moving in from the south and west, and again, some of that rain turning quite heavy, particularly across parts of England, Wales and Scotland into the early hours. By the end of the night, some clear weather towards the far northwest, and wherever you are, it's a mild and frost-free night. As for Sunday, well, unfortunately, it's an unsettled day to come. Bands of rain moving from west to east across all parts of the UK. Certainly to start the day on Sunday, some showery outbreaks of rain across the mainland of Scotland there. One or two brighter breaks in between, and quite a mild start to the day as well. For Northern Ireland, not faring too badly. Isolated showers, but some clear or sunny weather developing here during the early part of Sunday. And some clear to sunny weather across parts of Wales and the southwest, again with one or two showers around to start the day on Sunday. Further east and southeast, though, some more persistent bands of rain moving from west to east. And on the whole, it's a pretty unsettled day to come across the UK. Further bands of rain will work in from west to east across all areas through the day, coupled with quite blustery winds, particularly towards the north at first. Here we'll see gales for a time. In between those rain bands, there will be some sunshine, and that will help to lift temperatures into the low to mid-teens Celsius. Quite a mild afternoon to come. Temperatures up in the north up 12 Celsius, down towards the south there 14, even 15 degrees. 15 is 59 in Fahrenheit. Further bands of showery rain to come in from the west during the evening, and notice the wind starting to turn into a northerly direction from the north later in the day. That's a sign of things to come during the early part of next week. A colder spell developing, some sunshine, yes, but some frost, even a bit of snow towards the north, before things start to turn milder again from the west by the middle of the week.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be joining the Great British Giveaway list of winners with your chance to grab a fantastic £50,000 in tax-free cash. We've made loads of winners this year, and you could be our next.
Hi, I'm Angela from Wigan, and I won £30,000 with the Great British Giveaway. It happens to people like me.
For your chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Go to gbnews.com/shop now and take advantage of our biggest ever Black Friday sale with 25% off all items across our store and free shipping on orders worth £60 or more. There's never been a better time to grab something for the GB News fan in your life. From our signature clothing to drinkware, gifts, accessories and much, much more, you'll find the perfect present this festive season. Use the code BLACKFRIDAY25 on checkout at gbnews.com/shop for our best ever Black Friday deals.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, it's 2 o'clock on Saturday, the 30th of November. Yes, the 30th of November, the very last day of November, which means tomorrow is the 1st of December. And you're not ready, are you? Got my tree up, I bet you haven't. This is the weekend on GB News. Now, the serious news story of the day we have to talk about, assisted dying bill is backed by MPs. The Prime Minister was amongst those who supported the vote after an emotional debate. But those opposed promised to redouble their efforts to persuade MPs to change their minds as they move on to months of detailed scrutiny, which is needed, isn't it? And then a bit of showbiz for you. Penny Lancaster has hit out at Greg Wallace, saying she is prepared to go to the appropriate authorities over his behaviour after the MasterChef host has stepped down following allegations of inappropriate sexual comments.
Newbury is kicking off the Christmas calendar of racing. It's been a great atmosphere all day today, but we are ebbing closer to that Gold Cup at 3 o'clock.
And we are witnessing the death of the office party, are we? Employers could face claims for unlimited compensation if they do not take reasonable steps to prevent workplace harassment during the office boozy bash. Perish the thought that I'd ever do anything wrong at an office Christmas party. I'm Dawn Neeson, and this is The Weekend. Okay, but this show is nothing without you and your views, and lots of you been getting in touch, and I promise I'm going to read as many out as I possibly can, including the insulting ones. Tatiana, I'm going to get to you in a minute, don't worry about that one. This show is nothing with you and your views, and it's very easy to get involved. gbnews.com/your say. Now, you can talk about my favourite subject of the day, which is Christmas, because it's 1st December tomorrow, or you can talk about whatever you want to, basically. As I said, it's your show. What do you want to talk about? Now, you can also talk about the panel, because I know you love these two. Keeping me company this hour is former Conservative Special Advisor, the wonderful Charlie Rowley, and political commentator, the wonderful Jonathan List. And I would like to apologise in advance for the jumper. Not my choice. But before we get stuck into today's stories, let's get the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Dawn, thank you very much. The top stories. Assisted dying could become legal in England and Wales after the bill was backed by MPs in a historic vote.
The ayes to the right, 330. The noes to the left, 275. The ayes have it, and look!
Kim Leadbeater's bill received 330 ayes compared to 275 noes at its second reading in the House of Commons, a majority of 55. Sir Keir Starmer was among those who voted in favour of the bill. It would allow adults with just 6 months left to live to request medical assistance to end their lives. Kim Leadbeater says there is absolutely still a lot of work to do on assisted dying proposals, and slight changes to the bill are part of the process. Last night's result means the legislation will now progress to the committee stage for scrutiny, with the Lords also to be given opportunities to express their views on the measure before it potentially becomes law. President Volodymyr Zelensky has suggested the parts of Ukraine under his control should be taken under the NATO umbrella to try and stop the hot phase of the war. During an interview, the Ukrainian president was asked whether he would accept NATO membership, but only on the territory that Kyiv currently holds. He said he would, but only if NATO membership was offered to the whole of Ukraine within its internationally recognised borders first. However, so far, President Vladimir Putin has given no indication that he's abandoned his desire to subjugate Ukraine entirely. Meanwhile, last night, the Ukrainian foreign minister urged his NATO counterparts to issue an invitation to Kyiv at a meeting in Brussels this week to join the Western Military Alliance, according to a letter seen by Reuters. In other news, further accusations have been made against TV presenter Greg Wallace in the wake of him stepping away from hosting the BBC show MasterChef, while a review into complaints is carried out. Penny Lancaster's prepared to speak with authorities regarding her experience with Mr Wallace on Celebrity MasterChef following his recent departure. The Sun reports 3 different women are now also accusing Mr Wallace of groping. Production company Banijay UK says it's launching an external review, with Mr Wallace fully cooperating during the investigation. Greg Wallace's lawyers insist the claims are entirely false. Now, a memorial service has been held today for former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond. His wife of more than 40 years and supporters arranged a remembrance service for him on St Andrew's Day. Mr Salmond died last month in North Macedonia at the age of 69. He'd been at a conference when he suffered a heart attack and was buried in a private family ceremony near his home in Aberdeenshire at the end of October. A plane which experienced a serious incident in October last year is said to have left nearly 200 people on board at risk of developing hypoxia, a potentially fatal condition. The aircraft had been en route to Kos in Greece after departing Manchester Airport when an oversight from both pilots led to 2 crucial engine systems not being turned on, resulting in a loss of pressure within the cabin. A report from the Air Accidents Investigation Branch says the loss of pressure could be significant enough to affect cognitive performance. 3 days later, the same aircraft veered off the runway at Leeds Bradford Airport. GB News has contacted TUI for comment. And lastly, more than 100 dogs dressed in Christmas jumpers joined a festive parade in central London today in support of rescue charities. An estimated 130 pets made their way from St James's Park down the Mall towards Buckingham Palace with their owners this morning. The event was organised by Rescue Dogs of London and Friends to raise funds for Hungry Hearts Dog Rescue and ZEM Rescues, which rehome dogs from overseas. Prizes for the best dressed pets were awarded in Green Park next to the palace. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. Lewis Mackenzie has your next update.
Oh, thank you very much, Tatiana. And those dogs were lovely, weren't they? It's Christmas, come on. Chill out, people. But you just know someone's going to go, oh, that's not fair on the dogs. They don't like that, you know. We shouldn't do that. We should ban that. Come on, the fun police are out in force. And it's even, well, yeah, the 1st of December tomorrow, nearly Christmas. Just got to read this one out. And I know where you live, Alan, by the way, so be warned. Alan, Dawn is known as Tatiana in our house, not Tatiana, that's different. Tatiana in our house. Reminds me of the saying, lipstick, powder and paint makes a girl what she ain't. Just saying. Well, Alan, young man, what exactly are you saying? Let me know. gbnews.com/your say. And you can get in touch if you want to insult me or Jonathan or Charlie, because, you know, my panel are here and they're braced for it. It's a really nice jumper and it does match lovely with his trousers. Why is your cup making those weird noises?
Well, it's really want to insult us. We're beautiful.
They're beautiful. They are beautiful.
No matter what they say, words can't bring me down.
Right, any case, they are great young men, and I'm very, very happy for the company, because we do have to talk about the big story of the week. Assisted dying is one step closer to becoming legal in England and Wales after MPs backed the bill in that historic vote we saw yesterday. It followed 4.5 hours of debate with 300 MPs voting in favour and 275 opposing it. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, was one of the key people voting in favour alongside the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. The legislation would mean terminally ill adults with 6 months left to live are able to request assistance in ending their life. OK, well, you have introduced them already. I mean, blimey, it's Charlie Rowley and Jonathan Listen. If you don't know who they are by now, I'm not going to tell you. But they are here and they are braced for you. But, boys, assisted dying, it was a historic debate. It was interesting because it wasn't along political divides. It was along how MPs felt themselves. So you had sort of like some weird political combinations of people like Nigel Farage voting the same way as someone on the very far left, for example. What did you make of what happened yesterday, Charlie?
Well, it was historic, first of all, because in the last vote that took place where Parliament debated it, MPs rejected it. But obviously, I think that was in 2015. So enough time has passed now, over a decade since that last vote. So social attitudes might have changed a bit more, and MPs have obviously come in and heard perhaps more stories from constituents on both sides, whether it's about the most vulnerable. And I think this is why it's so difficult, because it's about protecting the most vulnerable. So whether you are someone who has been diagnosed with something that is a terminal illness. And it's something, I mean, we don't like to talk about death. We're British in that sense. We try to ignore it until it happens, and then we deal with it.
It's not something we like.
Exactly. So it's a difficult one in that sense. But it is about the most vulnerable, and people who have been terminally diagnosed, they are going to die. And so it's about looking at that group of people in isolation, on the one hand, and to say, well, if you have a terminal illness and you're going to become chronically ill and sicker and iller and become in more pain, how do you allow... I mean, it's very difficult to say, you know, if that were me in that situation, you know, and I said, look, actually, I wanted to go out on my terms when I'm actually not in a position where actually... it's not being a burden, but just where I couldn't actually... I'm alive, but I'm not living. I want to go out on my choosing and with all my family and friends and make it as happy as possible. That's, I think, what most people, or some people are certainly saying, if you've been diagnosed in that particular circumstance, then it's very hard to argue against that. But on the other hand, you can't necessarily take this in isolation because we've seen in other countries, and I'm pretty certain that if this bill, I mean, the MPs have voted to approve the sort of the topic. Now they've got to get into the detail before it actually
we are talking another
approved.
2, potentially 3 years before anything does actually.
Exactly. You've then got to sort of work out, okay, is this a sliding sort of path towards perhaps extending that further? So is it, not... Will it in the future not just be about terminal illness? Will it be about people just with maybe long-term sickness?
As we have seen happen in Canada,
as we have in other
Holland.
countries. So that's the balance. That's why it's been very difficult, I think, and emotive, and that's why you haven't seen party politics involved. It's just been about personal opinion and personal representation that MPs have seen in their day-to-day.
Would you vote
life.
for or against if you were an MP? Just quickly.
Well, it's incredible. I probably, if pressed, I would have voted for it in order to get it to the next stage of scrutiny. But I'm still undecided actually as to whether, if I were going to vote, whether I'd actually vote for it in its full passing or not. But to get it through to the next stage to allow more scrutiny, I think I probably would have voted for it.
Very good answer, actually. How about you, Jonathan?
I'd have voted very much in favour of it. I'd feel very, very strongly that this is the right thing to do. Absolutely, 100%.
Even though we've seen not very good things happen in Canada.
The whole slippery slope argument that you're talking about, which I've heard a few people mention, it just doesn't hold water because every single change would have to be authorised by Parliament. And it can't be a slippery slope if MPs are deciding it. A slippery slope suggests that you have no control over it, that you start at the top and then you slide inexorably towards a position that no one wants to happen. The MPs are sort of the gatekeepers of every single change to law. There can't be sort of amendments slipped through the back, say, oh, actually, it's going to be 12 months now, or actually, you don't need to have the High Court judges anymore. That just simply isn't how the law will work. And you have many other changes in this country that obviously you do have progressive change that happen with certain issues, and other issues will stay put, for example. So abortion law is a good example. There wasn't actually a slippery slope after abortion was legalised in this country in the 60s. It actually abortion became slightly stricter when the limit was removed from sort of 28 weeks to 24 weeks about 30 years ago. So there's no sort of destined reason why things should become more liberal or more relaxed. I think that there are very robust safeguards embedded in this bill and that are stronger than most other countries where this law exists. I think it ultimately comes down to a matter of agency and autonomy, and that people should have the right to go, as you said, at a time of their choosing and in peace, rather than being forced to suffer against their will until their bodies finally give out. I don't think a benign system forces people to suffer for no reason. It's not about, as one doctor said yesterday in the Commons, it's not about life versus death, it's about death versus death. And no one should be forced ever to make that choice unless they want to. And it does create a new law, this bill, that actually imprisons people, or sort of criminalises people who seek to encourage people to end their lives through as a personal gain or anything like that.
The reason why, I take all of that, but yes, the law will only change if MPs vote on it. But I think once you've made such a change, a dramatic change from not allowing assisted dying to allowing it, that is a huge change in itself, but then once you've made a huge change, you can allow smaller changes to then be built on top. So when social attitudes change to allowing and accepting in the UK, where we don't have it before, assisted dying, there is... Slippery slope might not be the right term, but could be, and I'm pretty sure that there would actually be extensions and building blocks on top of it. So you're right in terms of what you said. What is the difference, actually, if you are a patient who is diagnosed with a terminal illness? What's the difference between, to them, 6 months and maybe 8 months?
OK, but Charlie,
no, but hold on, but that's the point. As soon as you open the box and allow that sort of... what's the difference then between someone with a terminal illness and someone who might be 85, maybe 87, 90, and then they're suddenly diagnosed with cancer. Now, that patient might say, and it will be well within their right to say, I'm too old maybe for the treatment, because the treatment is hellish in itself. I'd rather actually just like to go now. That is a choice. And I'm not criticising people if they want, but I know the law doesn't currently allow for that. But it might do in the future.
But fine, but then...
So I'm just talking about the progress
that's fine, but then we can have that discussion when that argument comes up. What I'm saying to you is not that the law can never change and will never change. I'm saying that that is not what is currently being discussed. And I suppose that my problem is that people are having arguments about what might happen in 10 years. I think we need to have an argument about... But then in 10 years we can have that discussion. We can see how the laws worked up until then, and maybe attitudes will have changed, Parliament will have changed, and then that's fine.
You know that's not how these things work.
No, of course it is. Of course it is.
Understandably, campaigners on both sides. But the reason why people are worried about the extension of that law, or whether it could be, because again, there's no right or wrong. I don't think that's the problem. I don't think there is a right or wrong. There's absolutely nothing.
But then that's fine that people can discuss it when that's up for discussion.
But there is nothing wrong with somebody saying...
Do you trust politicians to have that conversation?
I think that we have no other choice. We have no other.
Recently,
we have no other choice, Dawn. Parliament. We have the Parliament is sovereign in this country. That's where sovereignty comes in this country, through Parliament, and so we elect representatives every 4 or 5 years to make these big decisions on our behalf, because we don't have a system of direct democracy where we have referenda for every issue like they have in Switzerland, for example. So that's how the system works. So ultimately, yes, we do have to trust politicians because that's how our system is built. But at the moment, Charlie, you have a system where people who might be in situations that aren't covered by this bill, but who have the means, for example, to go to Switzerland again, to Dignitas, and to take that decision with obviously a lot of money. So what you have at the moment is an inbuilt inequality where some people are rich enough to be able to make those decisions, other people are not.
But there's also the protections of people who, and we all know it because, again, we're in a funny old situation, I think, by just being British. We don't like to talk about death. We don't sometimes like to talk about sex. There are things we don't like to talk about just because it's too... but there will be lots of people, vulnerable people, who are either disabled or who are older or have other conditions, who the law can't legislate for emotion a lot of the time. And there'll be people sitting at home that are worried, people that are disabled, people that are getting older, people that might feel as though, oh, they're becoming a burden, maybe I should just give up. And so, sometimes you need Parliament, sometimes you need legislators to say, actually, to stop you thinking about that, or to stop your family, or to being coerced in any kind of way, we're going to prevent that bill being extended. We're going to prevent the idea of assisted suicide, as desperate as that is for those who are terminally ill, as desperate as that is for people who are ill or whatever, or sick. We're going to protect you, or protect other people from feeling as though that they have to do something that they don't necessarily want to do.
OK, we have to move on. Before we move on from this subject, a lot of you, I mean, as Charlie just said, we don't like talking about it. It is a horrible subject to talk about, but I think we have to face up to it, and that's why we're doing it today, so please bear with us on that one. But a lot of you have been getting in touch. I just want to read James, your message out. James says, Dawn, two-tier Keir has already started his own assisted dying process. It's called removal of the pensioners' winter fuel allowance. And James, lots of people are agreeing with you on the message board. So gbnews.com/your say. Please do keep them coming in. I will read as many out as I possibly can. Now, for all the best analysis on that story and many, many more, please do go to our website, which is gbnews.com. Now, I'm going to try and cheer you up because it is nearly Christmas, I might have mentioned that. It's time for our biggest and greatest British giveaway this year, and your chance to win £50,000 in tax-free cash. What a Christmas you could have with that, eh? It's the biggest cash prize we've ever given away, and it could all be yours. And it's very, very simple to win, and here's exactly how you do it.